Behold, it's Natalia. Let's go find some monkeys, shall we?
Would you say sex is like riding a bicycle?
Nothing gets me going like Christmas and wigs. Let's check out this show.
I remember the first creature I beheld. He was a squirrel. His name was Kevin.
I heard you need a DNA sample.
I want to find light and joy in things that bring us together and unite us. And I think science is something that can unite us. Ow. God damn.
There's a world out there, a world that needs to be beheld.
Behold! Welcome back to another episode of Survival of the Filthiest. I am your host, biological anthropologist, comedian, and total weirdo. Oh, Raisin finally got on the couch. Sorry, I've been listening to my dog trying to get up on the couch for about 3 minutes now. She's a special one. But I'm a biological anthropologist, comedian, and I started this show because what the fuck is happening in our country? I mean, we've got a war on science, healthcare, DEI, people of color, gays, bays, jetways, veterans, queers, engineers, the vax, paperbacks, teachers, creatures, women, and facts. We love our alternative facts here in this country. So what better way to resist than talk to scientists, comedians, and educators who are creating some good trouble to move this country forward rather than 5,876 steps back. And here's a quick reminder to please like, subscribe, and comment and ask questions in the chat because I'd love to answer them. Also, if you want to support this illustrious live stream, you can join my Patreon. I promise I'll make it worth your while. I'm not 100% sure what that means, but we'll figure it out as we go. And today we're talking about the power of data science and what exactly is data science, okay? And we're talking to actually a very good friend of mine who I love and respect, and I've had the pleasure of performing with her in Detroit of all places. Remember that?
I do.
Anyways, yeah. You can talk. It's cool.
Oh, okay.
We're going to be talking about the power of data science. But first, I got to be honest, folks. I'm not exactly the most data science formidable person. Hold on. We're actually, I made a mistake, folks. We're on the very last slide. So you're going to watch me do something very funny. We're going to go back through all the slides because the first slide is the same as the last slide. Did I mention that this is a work in progress? Okay, so we're talking to Dr. Andrea Jones-Rooy today. But first of all, what exactly is data science? Well, first, what is data? Well, that's my first mistake. It's basically what are data? Because data, folks, is plural, data. So it's actually what are data? And data, and by the way, the singular term for data is datum, as in datum, I don't even know them. And data, by the way, is not to be confused with this particular data. Although, fun story, I went to a wedding of a dear friend, and Brent Spiner, aka Data, was there, and it was back during COVID. And I had a small plastic baggie with some plastic gloves and tweezers, and I wanted to go up to him and asked if I could collect some data. Everybody convinced me not to, and I'm very glad I did not. But anyways, what exactly are data? Data are a collection of discrete and continuous values that convey information, describing the quantity or quality. So you get quantitative and qualitative data and facts, statistics, and other basic units of measurement that can be, basically analyzed to help tell a bigger picture of a bigger problem. And I know that, data can be looking at the past to better predict the future. It's not always correct. That's something to remember. So, data can be quantities, qualities, numbers, facts, graphs, observations, and measurements. It can be quantitative and qualitative. It can be normal or ordinal. Does that mean I'm ordinal? Because I'm definitely not normal. The qualitative data can be discrete or continuous.
I'd say you're continuous. If
Am I continuous?
Yeah, if I needed to weigh in, yes, you're continuous.
Okay, good. We're gonna definitely talk more about how I'm continuous. And data, I love this. Data can be raw and unprocessed. And getting back to our original data, this is what data would look like, raw and unprocessed. And I think I'm going to have to add that to any of my dating profiles, is that I'm raw and unprocessed. But this is, I looked up like the history of data and graphs, and even the graphs of the history of data made me want to crawl into a hole and die. But as you can see, you probably can't see because the data, the graph is so small. The history is very recent. About 1943 is sort of the beginning of talking about data, and data science didn't even really become a term. Look at all these men. Look at all these men in the history of data. Oh, doesn't that make you feel good? But as far as I know, it was Jeff Wu that was the first one that actually called data science, and actually wanted to rename statistics data science. And I'd love to talk to our guest more about that. But this is the exciting news. And this is what makes Andrea even more exciting to talk to, because in 2012, data scientist was called the sexiest job of the 21st century. So, folks, we got a very sexy guest coming to our stage. And Data Science for Everyone is a video series that Andrea Jones-Rooy actually has been producing with NYU. It's a way that everybody can become a data scientist. And if you've listened to any of Andrea's podcasts, she always urges people that everyone should understand and try data science. I also love this particular Venn diagram from her class, and it basically looks at all the different things that go into data science. But what I really love is that data science is not just, a science, it's an art. It's really getting into not just the quantitative, but the qualitative properties. It's taking data and giving it context. It's telling a story, which whoever tells the story is going to bring with their own biases. So that's something to consider. Yes. And we're going to talk about that. And if you want to read anything that Andrea has done, I highly recommend this wonderful article she did in the Daily Beast called "Why Everything You Know About Polarized America is Wrong and I Would Know," because Andrea is a data scientist. But this is a reason why you should be reading Andrea's writing. This is a great graph that she included in the article, but I just love this. In addition to resembling a concerning skin disease, this graph depicts a clear and growing ideological divide between Democrats and Republicans in the House that starts around the early 1990s. I mean, with jokes like that, I read that without seeing the actual graph, by the way, at first, and I still laughed. And here's another great graph just showing how we're seeing more Republicans, we're seeing a rise in independence, and again, the most striking thing about the above graph is how boring it is. Love Andrea's writing. But Andrea is the host of the podcast Behind the Data. Highly recommend. Talks to multiple scientists about how data science plays a role in their research. Also has hosted Majoring in Everything, because Andrea is a multi-hyphenate. And not only is Andrea a data scientist, she is a comedian. She is a circus performer. She is an aerialist, folks. I don't know. Can't be any cooler. I mean, look at this. You calling me a clown? Just absolutely gorgeous. So I'm going to read the bio of Andrea because it is beautiful. Dr. Andrea Jones-Rooy is the founder of the Data Thinking Revolution, an organization dedicated to bringing vigor, clarity, and thought and critical thinking to the wide world of data, analytics, and insights. She has worked for nearly 10 years as a research consultant and speaker for organizations as diverse as global Fortune 500s to tech companies to the UN on how to more thoughtfully, efficiently, and effectively use data to ask and answer questions they care about. In addition, Jones-Rooy hosts Behind the Data, a podcast that is part of the Daily Tech News Show network that uncovers the human stories, imagination, and creativity behind the data sets that power our lives. She also regularly contributes to articles and makes appearances on outlets as diverse as Bloomberg, the Daily Tech News Show, Sirius XM, the Daily Beast, FiveThirtyEight, Quartz, and more. She sought out for her unique ability to get everyone excited, very much so, about quantitative work, sees how it affects their lives, and learning new ways we can all get involved, not just math people, which is a dangerous term. She brings that up. Previously, Jones-Rooy was a professor at the Director of Undergraduate Studies at the NYU Center for Data Science, where she developed and taught her perpetually waitlisted flagship undergraduate course, Data Science for Everyone. I love these adjectives. You know I love these adjectives, Andrea. You know I do.
So many adjectives now that I
so
hear
many
it said back to me. Oh my God.
I get it.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Her signature style of energy, passion, and curiosity have brought students from all majors across the university to her courses. She has also since created YouTube videos and online accompanying text that highlight the key concepts from the course. She holds a PhD, total slouch, in political science with a focus on complex systems from the University of Michigan. Go Blue. Ann Arbor. That's where Michigan is, and has previously taught it at NYU Shanghai and Carnegie Mellon University. She's also a stand-up comedian and circus performer and performs in New York's top clubs and all over the world. So while her keynotes are, of course, professional and serious, you can definitely, this is actually her bio from her keynote page,
I
which you
was
should
like,
hire her.
where is this from? Yeah,
It's
okay.
from your keynote page. Hire her to do your keynote.
Yeah, please
You
do.
can
Oh my God.
yeah, please
Yeah.
do. Yeah, you're going to see why. Basically, you're not only going to get a great keynote, but you're going to get an unforgettable performance because everything that Andrea does touches turns to gold, but not just any gold, like glittered gold. So internet, people of the internet, please welcome Dr. Andrea Jones-Rooy. Yes.
Hello, people of the internet. Natalia, that introduction. Oh my goodness. I will both the whole time I was like, cover my face every time you said something nice. And then I also was like, I should just record that and make it play it every morning for my own self-esteem.
It's your affirmation.
Yeah. I was like, I spent a lot of time lying on the floor in my sweatpants. So I like what you said. That sounds pretty good. But
I'm here to gas you up.
I appreciate it. I
No,
appreciate it. I assume that's all we're here for, and we can all go now. It's like, I actually feel a lot better than
Bye,
I did
everyone.
before this. Yeah. Yeah. Your discussion of data, A+ as well. Well done.
Oh, good. I felt so. You know what? I'm going to be very honest. Of all the shows that I've done so far, I've had a wonderful crew of people, friends of mine. Data science was the one I was actually nervous about because it's not my. Even though I am a biological anthropologist, we had to use statistics frequently. All my data are in maps. It was all about collecting this. Sort of map and turning it into these stories of a physical representation of my research. I still felt like I don't quite understand everything. So I was both nervous because I didn't want to get anything wrong, but I was so excited because I feel like not only I could learn so much, but everyone else, it's going to be a fun conversation.
Well, thank you for having me on to talk about it. And I commend you because that's one of the many problems with I'm here to talk about data. One of the many problems with data science is it sounds intimidating. And I wish it didn't. And we can talk about this later if you want to. When I was in school, the field of data science didn't exist. And if it had existed, I never would have signed up for it because I'm like, oh, I can't possibly, that doesn't sound. But it's actually totally approachable and totally doable. So we have a branding problem. And so well done to you talking about topics that you don't totally feel comfortable talking about or know about. And yeah, no, it doesn't need to be as scary as it is. We need to work on our marketing is garbage. Let me just put it that.
Yeah, we need better branding. We need a good rebrand. Sexualize data science?
Yeah. I mean, the other problem is we like to, and a lot of the academy has this problem where it's like, we like to sound smart and esoteric and unapproachable. And I mean, look at what that's done to the world. It's not great, but all scientists love their dose of jargon because it all feels like you're part of a cool club. And it is a cool club, but we could also stand to not use so much jargon.
Absolutely. Well, I do want to talk about how you got to, I think understanding people's stories is so fascinating. And I know part of it, but I feel like, the internet deserves to know.
Sure.
How did you become the Dr. Andrea Jones-Rooy that you are now?
Finally, the story will be told. I honestly was just actually telling someone about this. It was just a series of terrible decisions. Not terrible, not thought out decisions. And I think I was telling a former student about this, and I think she was very disappointed because I think we all hope that people do things on purpose. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And then
yeah.
You find out you're like, that wasn't your plan the whole time. Like, oh my God.
But it's also exciting, because it means anything can happen. But
anything can happen.
I always think that the worst decisions lead to the best stories. So go on.
Oh, good. Yeah. All right.
I'm
that's
taking
good.
notes.
So I was in college and was one of those like millennial, didn't know what I wanted to do. I guess that's probably true for all generations, but I particularly was like, I have a liberal arts education and I generally care about the world, but I have no marketable skills. I have no direction, no anything. And I happened to have a professor who taught international relations who I found just totally amazing. And he said, well, the ultimate thing you could do is go to a PhD program. And because I have no brain or free will, I said, okay, I'll do that. I didn't know what a PhD was for. I mean, I knew it was like a degree that was after master's. I even said to him, I was like, what if I just get a master's and see if I like it and then keep going? And he was like, no. I'm like, okay, all right. And he was like, you can quit halfway if you want to. But what he doesn't tell you is that PhDs are cults. And so once you're in, you can't just walk away. It's very difficult. And in fact, Natalia, the first time we met, I saw you we've talked about this on other shows, I think, but I saw you were doing a show at Caveat, a theater here in New York City. And you said in your show, about how whenever you're not sure what to do in life, you think maybe I'm going to go get a PhD. And I found you after the show and I was like, hi, you don't know me. Do not get a PhD. You don't need to do it. You're fine. But because I didn't know. So I go to a PhD and I thought I was going to write international relations. I thought I was going to write essays about like the fundamental nature of war and peace and humans and are we inherently evil and could we ever have a, I thought I was going to write like theory stuff or like foreign affairs articles, debate Kissinger at some point, if I really, did it right.
Why not?
Anyway, there's a long way of saying I got there to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and which I also thought was called Ann Harbor until I arrived, and it's Ann Arbor.
God.
I would go, people are like, oh, you're moving to the Midwest. I'm from Maryland. And I was like, yeah, but at least it's on the water, the harbor. And I got there and there's no water. It's Arbor does not mean water. It means tree.
Yep.
Anyway, so I get there and they just made us do all the statistics and then all this game theory. And then we had to write all these programs that would do the statistics for us. And I was just like so out of my depth. I was not a math person growing up. I hated math. I didn't take a single math or science class in college, like by design. I was just one of those, I was just like, it's not for me. And that's why I think the idea of a math person is so dangerous because I was not a math person. And then it turns out if you sit in a room where they're talking about math for long enough and you don't have the self-esteem to leave a program until you think I just need to prove to myself that I can do this, you can do it and you can get through it. And now I have come to realize that numbers and math are really useful and really fun. They're not perfect. They have limitations. There's a lot of value in qualitative work and description and all kinds of things. But I feel very grateful that I was kind of force-fed this quantitative way of thinking. And so that's partly why I feel so strongly that people who feel it may be intimidated by data or statistics, like, you can do it. I promise you. I took geometry in middle school. It took me the entire year to realize that a proof was trying to prove something. I'm not joking. Like, I was like, why are we listing all these steps? We like start from a statement, we list all the stuff, and then we list the same opening. I was like, why are we doing this? And by like month 10, I was like, oh, I see. Like, if I can do it, anyone can do it. Anyway, I've been talking forever, but it was just totally by accident. And I feel really grateful. And as you alluded to in your opening, one of the things I really love doing is applying data and data science to social and political issues. So areas that feel like they wouldn't lend themselves to quantification in a particularly useful way. There's a lot of people in the field of political science doing really important things to say like, well, how do we actually turn something like someone's political beliefs into a number? And what can we learn from doing that? Anyway, I digress, but it was not on purpose. All of that is to say, I just was like, okay, numbers. All right.
No, I mean, I pivoted in high school because numbers were scary to me. So I think it's really inspirational. I really did. That's why I went into theater because I was like,
Yeah.
I remember I took geometry I went to Catholic school and they only had coaches teaching math, which was, that says a
Wow.
lot,
Yeah.
Coach Young. But yeah. And so I think it's so inspirational to see someone who had the same issue
Exactly.
go back and not only get a PhD, but like that is what you do. And that is,
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting how something you was never on your radar has become your wheelhouse. And what makes you so unique and so special is you're able to combine not only just data science and distilling it for the masses, but you're using comedy. Sometimes you even use your circus performing. Like you have kind of, again, I always talk about this, carving out your ecological niche.
Ooh,
Like
I
you've
like
carved
that.
out this, you've carved out this ecological niche. Hold on, spam is calling my phone right now.
Ooh, hi Spam. How are you?
Yeah, exactly. I definitely want to take a telemarketer right now. This is live performance, folks.
Yeah, we accept calls from robots on this show.
That could have been fun. We could have taken the call and you could have data science the crap out of it. I don't know.
Like, you're going to refinance my home? Okay.
The home I don't owe. I love
sure.
it.
Yeah,
You want to talk about my home? And I was like, sir, I don't own anything.
Right.
But
I get a lot of calls for car insurance, and it was like, I'm in New York City. Like, are you talking about my Metro card? Like Metro card insurance? Is that what we're talking
Are you
about?
buying? Are you offering a car? Is that what's happening here?
Yeah.
No, but what would you say to folks? Is there and the data science for everyone, are these a video series that people can access online? Because I was going to say, okay, this is great. Tell the people at home how you can get that.
Yeah.
Tell me, actually, by people, I mean me. Where can I find it?
Yeah, so it's on YouTube. It's on my YouTube channel, which is just Jones-Rooy, one word, my last name. I was recently at a conference and told someone that, and they're like, you need a better brand. I was like, okay. So, but in the meantime, if you Google my name and YouTube, you'll get to it. But it's a series of videos. So I taught this course at NYU, for many, many years called Data Science for Everyone. And literally the idea was, it was, especially for first and second year college students. I was hoping to reach out to students in particular who were like in like public policy or education or theater or whatever, who wouldn't otherwise have access to or a reason to take like a statistics or an econometrics course or something like that. So the course is really designed for people who have like, I've never written a line of programming in my life. I maybe remember mean, median, mode, and I have bad memories associated with those things. And so it's designed for that level. If you've already done some programming, you can skip the programming videos. But anyway, yeah. So I made 25 videos that were distilled the kind of key highlight points from the course. So it's not like the full lecture where you would like sit through and walk through the whole thing, but it's the key points where it's like, okay, in week 1, we cover these 5 things. Much of what you covered, right? So what is data? What forms can it take? What can it do? What can it not do? Right. And then, so you can walk through it. And then there's an accompanying free textbook that's online that is in more detail, that does follow the course pretty closely. So it's all there. I'm looking to find more ways to repackage it, because even that is like, who has time for 25 YouTube videos, right? But you can watch them out of order. Like you can skip to.
They're standalone.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. But that's, I think having, without a paywall, people have
Yeah.
access. And
the key is I make no money from any of this, which is like someone somewhere could monetize these things, but it is very free. So
we'll talk. We'll talk.
We'll
I
talk.
understand.
All right.
I mean, no, but I get it. I understand that, you want, I struggle with that too, where people have wanted to set up courses about understanding what science is and the scientific method, or even just breaking down biological anthropology. And it's, I've had places that would charge, but I also feel bad because I don't want to charge. I want this information to be out there. I just wish that somebody might sponsor it. Anybody, you know what I mean?
If there's ever
Because
a sponsor.
Right.
Yeah.
And I have so many questions, but first of all, I want to talk, you touched on it for a second about just how you've been able to use your data science background and your poli-sci background to look at just this idea of the polarization of America. And even your article for the Daily Beast kind of, sort of challenge the idea, are we really polarized? Can you talk a little bit about what the data says about, is America truly polarized? And if so, how so?
Yeah, sure. No, I would love to. It's one of my favorite topics. And so this is basically an article that is a summary of, maybe 4-ish decades of research in political science. And so I'll give you the shorter version of that, which is basically, I don't know about you, but I feel like from the like Bush Gore election, that was the first election I voted in, and I remember being like, well, this went badly, like regardless of what side you're on, like what a mess, like we can't. And then depending on what side you are on, it was even worse. But so I feel like from there, and then the Bush Kerry election, I remember that's when in my mind we started talking about polarization. And it was just like, oh, if you're watching Fox News, you have this set of beliefs. And if you're watching, reading the New York Times, you have that set of beliefs. And never the two shall meet. And we're just getting further and further apart. And so at least in my lifetime, I have always taken for granted, like, Americans are polarized. We live in a divided society. We can't agree on everything, on anything. And it turns out that if you are like, okay, that sounds right. It sounds like we're divided. I don't dispute that my Instagram certainly is divided. But one of the things you can do is say, well, if we are divided, how could we find that in the data? Sort of like, you feel sick, you go to the doctor, what tests would they run to determine either what kind of sick, or are you sick, or what have you? And so early on in my political science career, I didn't do this research. I've just always been very impressed by it. Some researchers said, well, what's weird is we do feel polarized, and we're talking about polarization. And when you look at leaders, so the House of Representatives, the Senate, those representatives are polarized in the sense of ideologically their views diverge. And so that's kind of what we mean when we say polarization, right? Like my beliefs are over here on the left and yours are over here on the right. And if we're more polarized, we're further and further apart. That is true in our leadership. So there's questions about why and all of that. But it turns out, and this is where quantification, I think, can be so powerful, those differences were not showing up ideologically among regular people. So most people are pretty moderate on gun control. They're pretty moderate on like, yeah, I see why there are some taxes I wish the government did less or I did more or whatever, but we're kind of in agreement. And even the ones that we're not in agreement on, like LGBTQ rights, we're not so far apart, and we're not getting further apart. The gap between the left and the right on LGBTQ rights has pretty much stayed constant, though it's like approval for LGBTQ rights has gone up on both sides, and the gap has not increased. But we feel like, and there is, maybe by the leadership, an attack on trans, trans kids and transgender rights and erasing genders and all of these things. But if you think about some of the issues like gay marriage, it's like kind of no one cares. And that's true
Yeah.
on the left and the right. So all of that is to say that ideologically, political scientists had a really hard time finding evidence that we really diverge that much politically in terms of everyday people. And if that's the case, then why does it still feel so bad and polarized? It's sort of like you go to the doctor and they say, well, you don't
Yeah.
have a fever, so you're not sick. And you're like, yeah, but I can't get out of bed. So I'm definitely sick. We're just maybe looking at the wrong place. Long story short, scientists figured out more recently that two things have happened. So one, we're not further apart. We maybe are a little bit to the left on guns and a little bit to the right, but most Americans are somewhere in the middle. I'm further to the left, but most Americans are in the middle. But the problem is that it used to be that there were Americans who were on the left on some issues and on the right on other issues, or on the right.
Yeah.
I'm conservative on guns, but I'm liberal on gay marriage or whatever. Right? That's gone away. So change number one is we're not further apart from one another, but we have done what they call sorted. We're sorted by party lines. So I don't have anyone on the right now who has any overlap with me. I mean, there are exceptions, but generally speaking.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
it used to be the case that it was like, yeah, I'm a liberal. It's so hard to even say. I'm a liberal Republican or a conservative Democrat. Like
Right.
those people are gone. And those people were playing a big role to normalize talking to the other side. I could talk to my neighbor about how we're all worried about climate change, and then we can just set aside the fact that we disagree about guns, but we could still have a civil conversation. So now we flipped, and I don't have anything in common with my neighbor. My views are still not that far from his, but we have
Right.
no common ground. And so we're not talking at all. And then that leads to the second change, which is we hate each other. So we don't disagree ideologically, but both sides consider the other side untrustworthy, hypocritical, self-involved, like doesn't see the big picture. Everything I'm on the left. Everything I've ever said about the right has said about me. And so it's this hatred that's dividing us. And that's both depressing because it's like, oh, the problem is you just don't like each other. So like, but it's useful because it's not necessarily telling us that policy compromise is within our reach, because we actually are pretty close. It's just we have these emotions that are getting us in the way. All of that is to say that that's still most Americans. Those of you, people who are watching online right now know, and I know, and I've experienced this too, that unfortunately the other thing going on is the loudest, angriest, most extreme voices on either side go to the top. And so part of it is that we're just not having conversations between most of us who agree with each other on, I generally don't want kids to die, and I don't want us to get sick, and I mostly would like the earth to be healthy. Like most of us agree. But we just can't get to that agreement because there's a shouting match on the far sides, and because we believe the other side is more extreme than it actually is.
Gosh,
that was such a long answer. I'm sorry. I could have just read the paper. I would have been shorter. Probably.
No, but it was such a good breakdown. I love that about the paper because I do feel that when I do have those conversations with people that would call themselves conservative, and we get into the nitty gritty, I find that it's not this huge divide, but there is very little, if any, like you said, overlap of yes, pro-choice, or yes, gay marriage is okay, even though they don't really much care. But it's like, well, then why wouldn't you want to, but it doesn't. They don't care enough, right?
Right.
And so, I mean, and the loudest, and I think the media has done a great disservice because obviously they're going for clicks and likes and shares and things like that, and even memes can be really hurtful too. I remember. I actually went 4 years without getting COVID, and I flew back from Miami last year. I was sitting on a plane I was coming back from the Galapagos, and I was on a plane from Miami
to go on that trip
LA.
with you. Oh yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
or I would have gotten COVID. So okay.
Exactly.
Great. Yeah.
And it was conservative COVID at that, because I get on the plane and I'm sitting next to this woman who is beautiful. She's like a Stepford wife, blonde, tall, looked like Hannah Waddingham from Ted Lasso. And I remember complimenting her eye makeup, and she had to use, I was in the middle seat, and she had to use my outlet because hers wasn't working. And I look over, and I'm not trying to peep, but I see that she's editing some memes. And then I see that they're hyper conservative memes, hyper conservative, kind of making fun of the poor and the sick. And it was very It was strange, and I saw that Atlas Society was the watermark at the bottom, as in Atlas
Mm,
shrugged. And then the
mm,
sneezing started.
mm.
And this was the first flight and this whole trip that I didn't wear a mask. And I kicked myself very much because, after probably 40 sneezes, I just kind of buried my head in my, blanket and hoped for the best.
Yeah.
And I got home and I Googled Atlas Society, and this woman was the CEO.
Wow.
But I
Yeah.
tested positive for COVID a few days later. I'm not mad at her for giving her COVID, folks at home. There's no blame in this game. I joke that I got conservative
I'm a bit
COVID.
mad, but that
Yeah.
yeah. I could talk a big game about being nice to the other side, but I'm like, conservative COVID? All right, Jesus Christ. Yeah.
Break a
Yeah.
glass and but
Yeah.
I joke that it's now Atlas sneezed is my way of
Mm,
calling the
mm.
Atlas shrugged. But yes, I feel like even these memes that get shared around,
Yeah.
especially because a lot of them are not rooted in real fact, right? Like
Right.
these alternative facts. So I want to ask you a little bit about how can everyday folks,
Mm,
and it might be a tough one to answer, critically think about data they're seeing in the
mm.
media? Is there a way maybe to sort of spot bias? Or, I mean, obviously certain outlets are going to skew a certain way, but is there maybe some telltale signs? Maybe there's not, but I'm just wondering if maybe there's something that you look for when you're like, oh, I don't know about this. I think they're misusing data
Hmm.
science to get their
Yeah.
way.
Oh, it's a great question, and I wish everybody asked me this question. But the main answer I would say is always look for. I mean, in everyday conversation, you're not able to do this. But if you're reading something online that is pointing to some data or summarizing some data, or there's a chart in an article that you're reading, when you have time, or if you can, go to the data itself. Any self-respecting or reputable source is going to link to the actual data. And if it isn't, I would immediately, that's like red flag number one, is like, okay, there could be some funny business going. It could be that they're just lazy, but that suggests that there might be other errors and issues as well that aren't maybe out of malice, but out of neglect. So really, just if you're going to work with data, it's just like you would cite your sources in a paper, like I read this book and I'm quoting this book and here's a link to this book. You do the same thing with the data. So I would click on the data itself, make sure that it's like actually there. It's not always presented in a way that's particularly understandable. Unfortunately, sometimes it's like they takes you to like a GitHub landing page you can't do much with, but you've at least said, all right, there's like some data here. It's not, it's a starting point. So, okay, so they're citing something that actually exists. The next thing you do is, because you can do a lot of, making things up. I mean, so I worked at FiveThirtyEight for about a year and a half, and one of our jobs was to collect all the polls that hit refresh on the predictions and the approval ratings and all that kind of stuff. And the number of, and I am someone who rather unpopularly thinks political polls are actually pretty useful in the aggregate. And I think they did a pretty good job leading into November, which is very unpopular view. So I'm like pro polls. And a lot of polling outfits, you would like see these results and say, okay, well, where's the data from the poll? And they're like, we don't have it. And you're like, okay, oh my God. Like,
Yeah.
you don't know if it's made up or not. It could be real, but all I have is a PDF of a PowerPoint slide with a bar chart. Like, how do I know you didn't just draw a rectangle, right? So number one, is there actual data that I could look at and ideally download or open or like interact with if I wanted to? Number two, you always want to find out how the data was collected and how the thing they're claiming to have measured was measured. I was so excited that you mentioned measurement in the opening because that is the underappreciated data science skill of the century. We're so focused on like LLMs and AI and machine learning, all of which are amazing. Some of my best friends are AI, right? But measurement is how you turn the world into data in the first place. So if you say something like, here's a study that reports that dog owners are happier. Question one, is there data somewhere linked that I could look at on these dog owners and their levels of happiness? Or even if it's behind a paywall, is it like a peer-reviewed journal, blah, blah, blah. Those aren't perfect, but better than nothing. Okay. Number two, how are they defining dog owners and how are they defining happiness? There should be documentation on that. Dog owner is a little bit easier, but even that can get tricky. It's like, did they ever own a dog? Do they currently own a dog? Are they the primary caretaker for a dog? Like even that question, you could actually kind of get into the weeds. Have they, does it matter how big the dog is? Bigger dogs make you happier? I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. But then happiness obviously is a totally difficult thing to measure. And you could be measuring, their overall satisfaction in life, but that could probably just be picking up their income. And by the way, if you have a higher income, you probably have a dog. Like, so you immediately get into all these tangles and you can't start to pick that apart if you don't know how things were measured. So even if you don't look through the data yourself, look for it's called a code book or a data dictionary, where the scholars or the researchers will say, by dog owner, we meant someone who has owned a dog for at least 6 months and said yes on a survey and da 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 da. And by happy, we mean on a scale from 1 to 10, they said their life was rated as a da da da. And you don't have to agree with the measure. I mean, it should be approximately what you would think is at least a starting point for happiness. And future studies or other studies might say, actually, by happiness, we meant how much they laughed during the course of the interview, which is creepy, but that could be right. Is that like run by old men? Smile, like
right?
I don't know. That's a terrible
smile, why don't you?
Yeah. Anyway, all of that is to say is that the second thing you want to look for is how was this data collected, and you want to know, and this is true for political polls, is like, were people called? Were they emailed? Was it a random selection and all that kind of stuff? And so you want transparency on that. And you can use your own judgment of like, is 100 people enough? Like in some cases it is, and in other cases it isn't. It depends on what claims you're trying to make, right? Were they randomly sampled or were they not randomly sampled? And so sort of digesting that. And then the third thing I would say, and I'll end it here because we could obviously talk for at least 25 more YouTube videos about this, but the third thing I would say is, are the conclusions that they're drawing, and this is barring any investigation of their actual like statistics or methods, it's like, are the conclusions that they're drawing fair given what the data purports, given what's in the data? So I'll give you another example. Is a friend of mine sent me a study. A new thing I'm trying to get my friends to do is send me studies so I can critique them. It's extremely fun.
So great.
It's so fun.
I'd watch that. I would watch. Yeah.
And this one, like, it was. I try not to get too in the weeds on it, but it was a survey that someone did in Florida, and it was about whether or not someone who was I'm trying to say this without getting all in the weeds, but basically, what if someone was saying saying hate speech on the street? To what extent do you think the police should get involved? To what extent do you think passersby should get involved? It was sort of like a civic duty / hate speech. And the study then varied the identity of the person doing the hate speech. So whether they were Jewish or Palestinian or black or white or whatever. And so he sent this to me and he said, what do you think of this study? And the overall conclusions were pointing out different levels of bias and tolerance depending on identity. And it was interesting and it was thought-provoking. But the conclusions that they drew were like, obviously there's a double standard and there are biases and there are this and there are that. And it's like, that may be true, but your very specific study where you simply said, imagine a black person is saying this, what would you do? Imagine a white person is saying this, what would you do? And showing different numbers is like a little scratch on what could be a whole picture, but you've done the little scratch and you're telling me the whole picture. When in fact, all you've really done is said that in this particular moment, based on how you phrased it and the people that you chose, people maybe gave answers that they gave because of different types of societal pressures or expectations or whatever. And you didn't at all tap into their actual bias. And we certainly have said nothing about double-edged swords or double standards or anything like that. And so a lot of times what happens is, even if the data itself is like okay, but not great, I'll give it a pass. But then you're like, the conclusions are like nowhere related. Like you just told and you said this so beautifully. It's like, we tell stories about data. Is the story this scholar or researcher or author is telling warranted given the limitations inherent in the data that they're using? And all data is limited. It has to be, or it would just be the world. These are like essays. I'm so sorry. I'm very long-winded. Yeah.
It's so funny because I'm listening to you and I'm like, I wish, when is AI going to get this good? And I don't want it to get this good either.
Right.
But I wish like my brain could take notes because I like had a thought there.
Yeah.
Because everything you're saying, as when I teach, or even when my friends send me articles too, I'll get articles that are very clickbaity. I mean, even the Dire Wolf one was a good example of just
you killed it on that. Yeah. Well done.
But no, thank you. But and last week I had my friend Adam P. Johnson talk about it because he actually works with wolves and is an environmental anthropologist and deals with this. But just the critical thinking, and that is one of the interesting points that I was listening to a podcast that you did recently. But you talked about like just the need for people or the desire for people to take like a research project class to better understand, data collection and what does it mean and the methodology and understanding like what is a sample size? Because I know that I'll get an article and somebody sends me, an article with a sample size of 16 people or something. And I'm just like, don't make me have to put on my, my little
Right.
scientist hat and kind of, well, actually the crap out of them. But it is, it's a very specific way of thinking
Yeah.
critically and really asking a lot of questions. And I think you broke it down so perfectly. The fact that you really do, because when people will send me articles, yeah, click on that link if
Mm-hmm.
there is a link.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times there isn't, especially with things like blogs, for instance, and
Yeah.
that is why, unfortunately, like you mentioned, the loudest person sometimes gets the most, attention. And like, where this rise in anti-vaxxers and these sort of mommy blogs, and that's not a
Mm-hmm.
hit on mommies, it's the hit on just the intellectualism or willful ignorance, and with no peer-reviewed evidence.
Right.
That's a huge red flag. But yeah, and I was just thinking, even with the polls that you were talking about, just in terms of the danger, the great part of polls, but the danger of maybe doing a poll either too soon or not asking the right questions or maybe misrepresenting the data is like in places like swing states.
Yeah.
And you see that your opponent's losing by a long shot. So you're just going to go ahead and vote for third party because
Right.
what's the point?
Right.
When it actually wasn't as close as you thought. And, you did have it. Like I did, things like that worry me because I think people see that and just lose hope and throw away, not that any vote is, everybody should vote, but like maybe throw their vote to something that would swing
Right.
that state. I don't know.
Right.
It's just, does that ever concern you in
Always.
terms of,
Yes.
okay,
Yes. I'm
yeah,
in a perpetual state of concern about all of those things. And, sort of like you were saying, I was like, my AI was writing like 10,000 different responses. So for the anti-vaxxers, for example, I don't know, this is not a world that I do much, actual research. I have some colleagues and friends who are studying, the spread of misinformation and the networks through which it goes and all of that. So I can't like speak to the science of it, but what I can say is that generally my understanding of anti-vax and other like vaccine skepticism, climate skepticism is a lot of times the language suggests that I don't know how to say this without sounding conspiratorial myself, but it's like they think they're doing extra science. Like I almost worry that the
yes.
idea of critical thinking has been weaponized to say, I'm going to out critical think you and therefore reject what mainstream science is saying.
I'm going to
And
listen to this man in my alley.
yeah,
Who's just
because
yelling things. Yeah.
yeah, and so I don't have kids, which is sparing me interactions with a lot of like pseudoscience. But friends of mine, especially friends of mine who are I was in grad school with, who live and breathe the statistics as well, have said that exactly. You said mommy blogs, parenting blogs, like in particular, because it's an area, and this is where I try to go back to my own polarization, my own lesson about polarization. Easier said than done is like, where can I find empathy and sympathy for these people, even if I think what they're doing is harmful and dangerous and all those things? And it's like,
Yeah.
most of these parents want what's best for their kid. They've been told that these things are dangerous. They don't have the critical thinking skills to evaluate it, or they've been told that this is actually extra critical thinking. And so they think they're doing the best. The area that I see this personally is with dogs. As my little Iris is sleeping.
Oh, hi, Iris.
She's bored out of her mind.
Hello. Oh,
she's but what with dogs as well, it's like, should they be eating raw food? Should they be eating grains? Should they not be eating those things? And there's pseudoscience you can tell any story you want to tell. And I find that the more kind of out there I get in terms of like, they need an all raw diet and it has to be organic and it can't be this and it can't be that because it's like, we have so little understanding of how any of this works that you're just cherry picking a study that you like. And the problem with science is that good science generates a lot of studies that yield contradictory results. And then it takes lots and lots more studies and further. So, well, these people said yes and these people said no. Like, that's confusing. And then keep going. But the problem is you just find the one and you live in confirmation bias. And so it's so tricky because it's not like I can roll in and say, hey, anti-vaxxers, you need to be critical thinkers and you need to do science. Because I think the response would be, yeah, I'm more scientific and critically thinking than you are because you're just taking all this stuff at face. Anyway, I'm very concerned about all of these things.
I have run up against that. I've had so many conversations where the response is, I have done so much more research than
Right.
you. This is kind of a tangent, but I went on a date many moons ago with a man who was an agent at CAA, and it was just a first date. But I remember at the time I was pitching an archaeological show. I was developing it, and I was actually going to go shoot a pilot presentation with my dad, of all people, on Catalina Island. And I remember having this date, and he told me, I told him, he goes, "What are you working on?" And I mentioned this show. And he said, "Oh, well, your competition is Megan Fox." And I said, "Excuse me?" And he said, "I represent Megan Fox, and she has read more archaeological books than anyone."
Anyone?
Anyone. I am not, I mean, like,
Okay.
stop, like, period.
Yeah.
Anyone, like, not anyone in Los Angeles, anyone that is also an actress, anyone. And I remember the date ended there in my head.
Mm,
I let it go on because I'm not a monster. But
mm.
it was one of those moments where I thought, because she'd been reading conspiracy theory books, right? Books that really were
Yeah.
pushing the ancient alien
Yeah.
narrative, that couldn't possibly have been people that were not Western European that could have built the pyramids. But it really, it bothers me, this idea of and I am all about looking for truth, and I try to come at it with, like you said, with compassion. Like, okay,
Yeah.
these people are just trying to do what's best for their kid, but, like, again, peer reviewed evidence still should be a bit of the gold standard. I mean, of
Right.
course, and that is why, there's multiple reviewers. They're pushing, it gets pushed back a lot of times. Is
Right.
you've published, I've published. It's
Takes
tough.
forever. Yeah.
It takes forever. It's a lot. It's painstaking, and the reason why is it's the checks and balances, making sure that you're not just saying, vaccines turn my dog gay. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, my
Right.
dog's gay because my dog is gay.
Right.
It wasn't vaccines that.
Raisin, we support you.
I love my gay dog.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's definitely, and it's also, oh my God, I totally blanked on what I was gonna say, but it's gonna come back to me. It's gonna come back to me. Oh,
Conspiracy gay
all of
dogs.
this stuff, doing really good science takes a long time. And we're up against, we're on a 4-year at best peer review cycle from like inception to publishing, at least in the fields that I've, spent some time trying to publish. And we're up against someone who says, "Well, I did a survey of my neighbors and I posted it on Facebook today, and tomorrow it's viral." And so it's just like the good stuff takes a long time. Oh, and then the other thing I was going to say is that I think that one thing that science has done wrong, and I am trying to A, think through if I'm right and should do something about this, and B, also give myself, take some responsibility for it, is science is fundamentally uncertain. And the point of science is to try to figure out why we're wrong and what are we missing and what could it be. And a challenge with all of this is, as you said, we're up against a world where we want certainty. We're shouting about certainty, and certainty is going viral, and it gets the clicks and gets the headlines. Like, I'm going to click on a study that says coffee causes cancer before I'm going to click on a study that's like a 9-month, controlled experiment randomizing the exposure to caffeine among a group of, you're just like, I'm already up. I'm
yeah.
over,
Snooze fest.
And so I think, and we saw this with masks, and we see this with climate too, where it's like, we try to sound certain in order to play the game of getting clicks and getting people to pay attention. And because public policy, there really isn't a lot of room for nuance. So everyone's like, don't wear masks because the nurses need them. And then all of a sudden it was like, do wear masks. And then it's like, well, which is it, science? Like, why would I believe or trust anything you have to say if you can't get it right? And it's like, actually, you shouldn't have to believe or trust anything I'm saying. You should have the skills to look at the body of work and see that what we're saying about masks is reflective of A, changing understanding of the virus, and B, changing understanding of the needs of people working in health. And you're just like, it's over. Like, there's no room for that. There's just screaming about our rights that, so it's like, we're trying to fight with our weapons, or our like, the argument of science is like based in doubt and humility. And that tends not to win in a world where arrogance and certainty is who we listen to. Does that make sense? Like, and I don't have an answer for that. It's like, well, it depends is like a good scientific answer. And you can't, it's like trying to fight. You're in a sword fight with a chopstick. It's no good.
No. And I know,
It's a weird analogy, and I'm sorry for that.
No, but it's true. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that was a big takeaway from COVID, is the mishandling or the undereducation of people when it comes to science. And you and I both talk about what exactly science is,
Mhm.
and we have a similar way. I actually was listening to a podcast, and you mentioned my way,
I was
and
going to say,
mentioned
I
your
love your
way.
way. Yeah.
I know, I love your way. So, but like we talk about, this idea that science is not static, it's not fixed. I always call science more of a verb rather than a noun. It's constantly changing. Good science changes. Good science is not fixed. As you gather more data, it's going to change.
Yeah.
And, people want religion, which is more static. It's fixed. There are rules and the rules do not change. Whereas in, the beginning of COVID, Fauci was saying this, like my pod in New York, we're all epidemiologists in the ER. So like I was getting different stories each day because they were gathering more data. So tell me, what is science to you?
I mean, the line of yours that I constantly quote, and if you book me to be a keynote speaker, I will say it. I say, my friend Natalia says science is a verb, and it's something you do. It's something that evolves. It's something that changes. So usually what I say is I just quote you. But no, to me, science is a way of thinking about the world. And it's a way of saying, here's what I see going on, whether it's data of what's happening in front of me outside the window or a spreadsheet or something I read, whatever it is. And then the science part is it's literally the scientific method. It's going through the steps of saying, okay, I see that this is the case. Why is this the case? Well, here's what I think might be the case. Okay, if I'm right, what else should I see in the world? And can I verify that? But B, if I'm not right, or even if I am pretty convinced by my own idea, and this is the piece that I think we skip a lot, what are the other possible causal stories I could tell that would get me to the exact same result? And so usually when I see people do science or think they're doing science, it's a kind of like, oh, I think there's traffic today because I was gonna say because the Pope is in town, but it's a little too soon for that. So I think there's traffic today because it's UN week in New York. And then you look and you say, well, it is UN week, so I must be right. And it's like, that's only a teeny tiny bit of the scientific process, right? It's like, if I'm right, the traffic is here because it's UN week, it must also be UN week. I look up and say, oh, it is UN week. I say, but also another explanation could be separate from UN week. There could be construction on the FDR. This is all very like New York City based, but
I love it.
We use it every day in our lives to like actually get to the bottom of things. And we're quick to let go of like, oh, it actually was because of this. And it's actually because of that. And so science is saying, what are all the possible explanations I can think of for why something is happening? And then what do I think is the most plausible? Why? And then keeping an open mind to continue to be updated along those lines. Whereas again, with like the anti-vax thing, it's saying, I think vaccines cause autism. If I'm right, then I should see kids develop autism after they get a vaccine. Well, I see it. It's in the data. It's irrefutable. And it's like, well, the scientists would say, what else could be explaining this particular thing? Well, all these other things. So it's a way of thinking. And in particular, it's like a branching way of thinking where we always want to know, what are the other possible explanations for what I'm seeing? Not just the one that I think is going on.
Absolutely. It's that confirmation bias, trying to figure out we were talking about this before we jumped on about, having this idea of how the world works and trying to find data to support it. And sometimes there is no data to really support it,
right?
Or it's anecdotal. And that's, and there's something else that can explain it. And I think the open mind part is tough because, I mean, would you, as a data scientist that has looked at, a lot of, I guess, research, understanding the way people think, do you have any insight? And this is just more of an opinion question, is why people have a struggle keeping their mind open?
I'm not a neuroscientist and I don't know the biology of this. I am very intrigued by the studies that do come out, and I don't know enough to even say if they're any good, but the studies that come out that say like some people are kind of more risk averse or flexible in their thinking, and that's separate from our political beliefs. Some of us gravitate more towards hierarchical societies or religious practices that are very prescriptive versus very open. I think there's something biologically in us that might make us more wired to new ideas or not. But more in the domain of what I can speak to is there's some really interesting political science research going on around our political identities and how those have become much more important parts of our identities. So it used to be the case in the United States that you would say, what's your identity? And it'd say, well, I'm Andrea. I'm a daughter and a dog parent and a New Yorker and an American, and like roughly that order.
Damn it.
Yeah. And then later on I might say, and I'm a Democrat or whatever, right? Whereas now it's like, I'm Andrea, I'm a New Yorker, and I'm a Democrat. Like that would be like, it's become more, none of those are actually, I don't know, what is my identity? But our political identity has become much more salient and central in our identities. And so, and others have made this case as well. It's like, if I say, oh, it's going to rain tomorrow, and then someone looks at the app and says, actually, it's not. And I say, okay, I'm not like, my identity isn't harmed. by this
Shattered.
new information. I mean, it could be if you start making claims about climate change, but it's not like core to me. And I'm like, okay, fine. The movie's
Yeah.
at 10, not at 6, like I thought. I don't care. But because our political identities are now so central, it's not just, oh, if someone has a different view from me, I want to have a debate with them. That different view is a threat to my own existence and my identity. And so we start to take facts that are not that personally. And we start to get emotionally and like entwined with an outcome being what it is. So in order to be a good person on the left, I have to believe this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing. And in order to be a good person on the right, I need to believe these other things. And if someone starts to roll at me with evidence about vaccines not actually causing any of these diseases, not only does that like make me feel bad about not vaccinating, the decisions I've made in my own family, it also threatens my entire sense of community and self, because all my friends are also don't
on
trust
that
it.
train.
So it's just become enmeshed in our social lives in a way that I think, I'm not a historian, but like maybe religion once had, or even nationalism or something like that, where it's just become so personal that we feel attacked when we're told that we're wrong. It's sort of like if someone said, actually, you're not a member, like you're not gay. And you're like, no, but I am. Like, and I'm not saying that's the same thing, but it's like we take it so personally. If I disagree with
It's part
someone
of
on
your identity.
Palestine, even though neither of us are Palestinian and we've never been there, it feels like an affront to my existence when we disagree on it, even though it actually has like no direct bearing. Obviously it has bearing in the real world. And some of these issues, climate change and guns and all of that, it does affect our personal safety as well. But I think it's much more that we take these facts become part of our identity. That's my answer.
Yeah. I mean, and this is something that I struggle with sometimes too, is this idea that there's always been a lot at stake, but I feel like it feels a lot more at stake now, especially I think because rights have been gained and now they're being threatened to be taken away. And so now it feels, and that's, I have been as extreme as saying that if you vote for Trump, you vote for fascism, you vote for somebody who co-signs with white supremacy. And then you can make that sort of conclusion. Well, I mean, if he's for white supremacy, those people who voted for him, and that makes it really easy to be like, well, if everyone who voted for Trump is a white supremacist or at least co-signs it, it's easy to not like a group of people, which is very dangerous, right?
Yes.
And I have to remind myself that because, I do also know that people are more apt to listen to folks that look like them. Right. So that's why talking to white people who might have voted for Trump, even though I have opinions, is still good because maybe I can help. I don't know.
I mean, you've hit on something that I wrestle with all of the time. And to the point where I worry when I talk about this, including right now, that it's hard to talk about this stuff without sounding like a Nazi apologist in some way. And it's like,
you don't.
No, I appreciate you saying that, but it's like, but I agree with you. It's like Larry David had that great piece in the New York Times yesterday.
Yes.
That was like, oh, I had dinner with Adolf Hitler and it wasn't so bad. He's actually a nice guy if you don't talk about the issues. And it's like, he makes a good point. And I think I have no tolerance for, policies that strip rights and things based on, decisions and policies that are racist and hateful and xenophobic and harmful. And there's no due process. And like, the list goes on. I think that the tricky bit is that I think that there are a lot of people to the right of me politically who I agree with more than I realize, because I assume that if they voted for Trump, they agree with Trump. And so I'm with you that in my mind, I say anyone who supports this man clearly also is a white supremacist, authoritarian fascist. And then to my great dismay, when I have conversations with people on the right, including people who voted for Trump, often what I hear, and again, this is anecdotal, but often what I hear is that they're operating, I'm not making excuses. They're still, most of them were in Texas, so their vote didn't matter anyway, but often they're operating under a different set of facts than I am. And it's like they're making decisions. Like, we're not in the same grocery store trying to choose a cereal. Like, we're in different grocery stores. And so a lot of what he was saying is and I disagree with him on this, but he was like, I didn't vote for the Democratic Party because I worry about, increased power in the executive, which is ridiculous because Trump is obviously flouting that completely. But
Wow.
whatever. And I didn't like regulations, and I don't like this, and I don't like that. And frankly, I don't like that Democrats call us racist. And I was like, okay. I was like, well, we are racist. All of us, everyone's racist because you're born into a society. And he was like, oh, and his definition of racist was, I won't talk to someone based on their race, or I will. And so it's like, I'm not being very articulate here, but it's like, we weren't like, it's not that the Trump voters that I've talked to are one minus my views. They're not like, I'm like pro-trans rights, they're anti-trans rights. It's like, they have a different set of views that are like, because they've been led to believe that it's an attack on women. And so it's like, I can see, I don't agree with them and I don't sympathize, but I can see why you would come to that conclusion if you are in the universe of facts that you're in. And being able to see that, I think, is important, but it's hard to talk about without sounding like you're a Nazi. Does any of that make sense? I'm like,
no, it absolutely does. Cause I this is the problem. And I'm glad we're having this conversation. Honestly, because and this is where the media comes into it, right? Like, so you said they're in a different store, and that store in this particular case could be Fox News, Newsmax, whatever, Newsweek these days, and it's a store that is feeding them information that is filled. And that's why I think understanding how to interpret bias, or at least maybe spot it and critically think about it, I think is important for moving forward. And of course, those on the left are getting their news and their facts, from a different place. But at the same time, even like you said, even the idea of what defining, because as a scientist, you want to define everything. I remember it was one of the other, my AI notes earlier was thinking about when I would make my students do like an ethogram or come up with a research project for studying monkeys per se, like, right? Like they have to define what does eating look like? Because eating could be a million things. Eating could be like driving to the car to go to McDonald's. It could be in the, just sitting there at a table, or is eating literally putting the food in your mouth and chewing. And that's how you have to define it. And we're like living in the world where these things are not properly, or at least uniformly, defined. And so, we're even arguing over what does trans rights look like? What, what exactly is this argument that, trans women in sports? And I mean, it's just like, I just feel like there's a lot of, we're speaking two different languages, but at the same time, I still have the same anger.
Well, that's just it. Is that I'm like
not wanting to talk to him.
Like I was gonna say every other day. It's like every other hour. I'm like, I need to, like, do I need to scream as loud as I can, or do I need to try to talk to the people to my right, but just to my right? I can't go too far, right? And try to like persuade them that in fact trans rights are not about erasing women, right? And it's like I can see where if you are fed a news diet that contains the X, Y, and Z stories, that you would say, oh, you want to erase women's sports. And we can talk about, all of a sudden you care about women's sport or whatever, right?
Yeah, right.
But it's
when
like,
have you watched women's basketball?
It's and it's not like making excuses, because then it's very easy to say, well, why aren't you just watching a different news source? And it's like, well, I don't know, Andrea, why aren't you watching a different news source? Like, why do I think I'm right? And I have enough low self-esteem that I'm like, well, I don't know. But then I'm like, well, I obviously think they're wrong. And so you're like, I don't know where the line is between, like, I don't know if what we should be doing is being more vocal in what we think, or trying to explain what we think to people who think they don't agree, but if they knew what we were actually talking about, might. And the second one feels bad and scary, and certainly like I'll be destroyed on social media. But to me, it feels like something that at least I haven't tried, because I feel like I've been yelling into the void since 2015 and it's not working. Anyway, I'm sort of digressing.
No, but it's true. I the first person I interviewed on the show was Dr. Amanda Townley, who I feel like you would absolutely adore. This woman. She is the executive director of the National Center for Science Education, and she's from Alabama. She's a beautiful platinum blonde with a wonderful Southern, accent, and I absolutely adore her. And I've watched her eviscerate creationists in a New York bar, but with a smile on her face and in the kindest way. And she had a conversation that was hard to have, but in his language, because they looked like each other. She's Southern, like she can't, how the heck can she talk, me out of being a creationist? She's from this, she sounds like a Southern Baptist, but she talked about radical empathy. And but again, with
Mm.
like the caveat of not going, you can't go too far, right? Because those folks, it's a different, it's not
Like
even
you
a
said
different
something
language.
great online the other day about like, being tolerant of intolerance is itself intolerance. Like you have to draw the line somewhere. And I
Yes.
agree with you on that. It's like if you're starting to say that, these sorts of people should be not treated as fully human or whatever version of that, it's like that's unacceptable. But
Yes.
is there a way that are there things we could talk about that could help you be like, actually, this is why I really wish we had gun control. Like, and you could actually just see that. There's a great concept in some political science paper called the ideal information or the ideal informant, which you
Ooh.
are, and it sounds like this person is, which is the ideal informant is someone who is like the person who's most likely to change someone's mind about something. And it's someone who, exactly what you said, the more you look like, sound like, have the same background as the person you're talking with, the more likely they are to listen to what you have to say and take you seriously. So some of the things that I remind myself are like, I am an ideal informant for other white people, other people from Maryland or Appalachia, or I'm an ideal informant for um, you know, millennial or whatever the term is. And so it's like, who am I super close to in most ways, except for this thing that we disagree on? Like that's where I think there's promise. So I think you and me talking to white people, like we should be doing that work and like not forcing black people or trans people to do it.
To go into uncomfortable spaces. I mean, like that's,
Yeah.
that's, I remember, yeah, I mean, having those conversations with those uncles, those folks in your family.
Hmm.
I don't see, most of my family is very, very, on my dad's side, incredibly liberal. On my mom's side, I think there are still some that are pretty conservative, but I
Hmm.
don't see them very often. So there's not
Hmm.
that conversation at a dinner table.
Right.
We don't see each other. It's not because we don't want to, we just don't live near each other. But also, our beliefs are, we haven't talked about it. And I think it would be very hard, but I think it would be very important to have those conversations. And I think for folks that are like, I don't know, it's uncomfortable. It's like, can you imagine what it must be like to be on the recipient end of the
Hmm.
racism, the bigotry, like
Yeah.
your moment of being, in discomfort,
Yes.
to have that conversation pales compared to a lifetime of
Right.
bigotry, right?
Right.
So get uncomfortable, have the conversation.
And that's such a good point, and it goes back to that. There's some quote that I'm going to botch, where basically it's like, I can choose whether or not I want to have a difficult conversation with someone about trans rights or Black Lives Matter or whatever. But a black person and a trans person can't choose to be black or trans. They just are. And so their life is navigating these difficult conversations or the potential for these difficult conversations or the biases and the isms and the the violence sometimes. Whereas I can sit here and be like, do I really want to have this conversation right now? I'm
Yeah,
tired.
right. No, no, no. And
Yeah.
that's, I think it's important. And again, it's speaking to making change. It's kind of like I feel like in relationships, I was like, do you want to be right or do you want to have peace?
Hmm.
Do you want to always be, yelling and get your way, and screaming, like you said, into the void? Or do you want to actually try to find some common ground, which is tough and it seems
And it doesn't have to
impossible?
be. I think what you're saying made me think of this. Sorry to like cut you off. I got
No,
excited.
no,
Yeah.
no,
Okay.
no.
I was like,
No,
oh,
come.
which is we don't have to. And this is what's so tricky. And social media isn't helping. I don't think. Which is we don't have to agree on everything to have a good conversation. So it's not like I have to sit down with my in-law who is an anti-vax, anti-climate, anti da 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 da, and persuade them on all of the things. I
Yeah.
could actually just talk about the measles vaccine or something. Like it doesn't have to
Right.
be the whole thing. And the other thing that I have been thinking about as we've had this conversation is an earlier episode a couple weeks ago. I had someone on my podcast, also a political scientist. His name is Pat Egan. He's a professor
Oh, I
at
love, it's a good
NYU.
one.
Yeah. Thanks. He was saying, I was like, all right, you study this stuff. Like, how do I keep from freaking out? This was like a couple weeks into the Trump administration and executive order frenzy and this and that. And I was like, what are your thoughts as a scientist, like on how you're making sense of all of this? And he made a very good distinction that I have held in my mind, which is when we look at what's happening in the executive branch and in the government and with Doge and all of these things, try to separate what are the policies and actions that are being put into place or enacted or declared that I disagree with, like politically, ideologically, and what are the ones that are actually potentially damaging or at least transformative of how the government operates. So it's
Mm,
like you could be, and this is where I say this because it's been helpful to me. I'm like, am I mad because I think DEI is valuable, or am I mad because this is a threat to the way that a random organization has oversight into how, Doge coming in and doing all these things, right? And it's like, I'm mad about both. But I can't have a very productive conversation about DEI with most people on the right, but I can have a productive conversation with people on the right about, if Democrats are enacted next and they create some separate agency that all of a sudden is making all these decisions, like, would you like that? And you can talk about the kind of structure of what they're doing. And so even the same issue, which is Doge is slashing DEI, the federal government, it's like, you don't have to debate all aspects of it. You can simply say, what do we think about the constitutionality of this random branch having access to all this data? And you can just talk about that. And I think you can find points of agreement there.
Yeah.
I don't know if that distinction makes it. It helped
That does.
me. Yeah.
Yeah. No, because again, it's not about necessarily what is actually happening, but just the fact that like if the same egregious
Yeah.
behavior was happening, and a lot of people would say, "Oh, I would not
Right.
like that." I would not be. Yeah, and I also had someone on a couple weeks ago talking about the empathy gap that we're seeing too, and that's until something is directly happening to them, do they
And even then, yeah.
and even then, sometimes they're like, "Oh, it's fine. Eggs are $562. It's fine.
Yeah.
Whatever."
Yeah.
Yeah, even then, sometimes it's slow to really kind of, and is that because of the identity thing that you think?
I think it may be, and this same person, Pat Egan on my show said something else along these lines, where he's done a lot of work in particular around Americans' views on climate change and whether or not we can make progress on climate policy. So kind of going back to where we started this conversation on polarization, indeed on the right, most people are less inclined to put the economy before climate. Many people are skeptical of climate change, blah, blah, blah. But he said, it also happens to be the case that most big swaths of land that are good for renewable energy sources are red states. Texas, Gulf states, the whole middle with all the wind and the sun, all of that.
Yeah.
And so he was like, if you talk about it in terms of we're creating jobs and it's a new industry and it's income, and we also like cheap energy in this country, and as long as you don't, I'm oversimplifying, but like couching it in climate change isn't going to get us anywhere. Just building a factory and having a job that is on a wind farm or whatever is something that could actually make red states places where renewable energy is like a forefront industry, as long as we just don't call it climate change policy.
Right.
And so it's kind of like, what battle are we fighting? Yes, I would love to win the hearts and minds and have people agree and share a concern for planet Earth and blah, blah, blah. And also, I would just like some solutions. And so you can kind of be, strategic in that way and say, like, how can we, call it framing, how can I reframe this policy to make it more palatable? It's like, let's just talk about jobs in that case. Let's and we can, most Americans, and that's the other thing he said. He's like, most Americans have the same values. Most of us want to live in a society that's roughly fair. We want to live in a society that's roughly stable. We want to be able to like work and support our families. Like, how the things that we disagree on, is there any way we can start from that common ground and be like, setting aside our identity, can we just make sure that airline travel is safe? Like, why don't we just talk about it that way? Right?
Yeah, I mean, oh goodness gracious. Yeah, I mean, and I love that podcast. People of the internet listen to that podcast.
I didn't mean to name drop it so many times, but his episode I've thought about a lot since I talked to him.
I really enjoyed that podcast. It made me think, I mean, and of course, I wanted to read the Daily Beast article because I think it really touches on the same idea that we really want the same things in this country. And that is why it's crazy that, two groups of people who want the almost exact same things. I mean,
yeah.
But
it goes back to this,
but like the core. Yeah.
Yeah.
We want to feel safe and happy, but unfortunately, let's be scientists. What is safe? What is happy? Safe for people that are white supremacists. We know what that looks like, and we don't, that's not good. That's bad. That's very bad. And what is happy, right? Happy is happy, having a third home in, the Caribbean, is happy having the lights on, it really is subjective and relative. So, God, data science is fascinating.
I mean, that just kind of goes back to the whole, like, the reason that I like this stuff is that I have found that even though I grew up with numbers scaring me and like science, I hated science class and it's like, oh, like if you can thoughtfully turn some of this gnarly stuff, like our political values, into numbers, and that's a big if, because you can very
Right.
not thoughtfully do that and run a random poll in Florida and call it a day. But if you can really do it thoughtfully and then go back and say, did I really measure what I think I'm measuring? And if I did, you know, what might these conclusions be, and be open to updating all that, like you can actually get a grip on all this miserable stuff that's going on. Like reading political science papers, even if they ultimately, you know, reveal bad news, like the world is becoming less democratic or whatever. I like that we can document it and actually like see it, or I was gonna say know it, but know it tentatively at least. It's sort of like the same thing where it's like going to a doctor, sometimes getting the diagnosis, even if it's a lousy diagnosis, is helpful because you're like, okay, now I know what I'm working with, you know? So that's kind
Yeah.
of like in my world of like turning everything into data, it's like, why bother? It's like it kind of helps us get a better diagnosis. Like, oh, I'm gonna treat you with, you know, more empathy-led conversations as opposed to a policy debate or whatever. Right.
Right. Well, one of the things that you said, I think it was in that podcast, or maybe it was the one I listened to that was from the TEDx world, but you basically said data science is using the past to help
Mm,
sort of predict or at least
mm.
model future,
Yeah.
behavior. Can you speak a little bit about that
Yeah, I mean, we only have data about the past for now, right?
for now?
Yeah, I mean, I was an extra on Minority Report, and there was
Oh,
a bit of predicting future data. Not to brag, that's what you know me from.
well
Uh,
then.
well then, but generally, right, we're working with data is driving through the rearview mirror. Like you have no idea tomorrow what, you know. You can look at all the market data you want in the world. No one's going to know what happens tomorrow, and obviously, people make a living or don't make a living based on predicting it. And so whenever we're working with data, we have to be very, very humble about the fact that tomorrow everything could be totally different. It usually isn't. The sun comes up and this happens and whatever. But generally speaking, a big limitation in all of this is assuming that because people said this in a poll and because they said that last time and because when it rains, no one goes to protests, that all of those things are going to be true again in the future. And this is particularly gnarly when it comes to working with data about humans, which is the data I tend to work with. I have a lot of envy of people who study, like, I don't know, atoms and molecules. It's like you heat up water, it boils every time. It doesn't matter if like the media is saying that only woke people boil. Like you're just gonna boil. Like you don't have to like you said, it's like, oh, the polls are saying it's a lock. Now I'm not gonna vote. Like we react to studies about ourselves in ways that are hard to predict, which makes the whole thing like kind of, you know, you're working with I was gonna say a moving target, but really, yeah, you're just driving through the rearview mirror, assuming that the road hasn't been that windy, so it probably isn't. You can make some safe assumptions, but you need to know that things are going to be unpredictable. And this gets into kind of the like data science, machine learning world
Yeah.
where we do a lot of predictive work with data science, and it's, you know, there's a ton of money to be made in like, I want to figure out what ad to feed you because I want to figure out what you're most likely to click on. You know, you are being predictive in that way. I'm predicting what show you might like and what random rug you might buy. Instagram has been trying to make me buy rugs for 2 years. I won't do it.
Well, you
Uh,
do. Don't you live above? Do you live above people? Isn't there a law in New York that you have to have a certain amount of
oh,
carpet in your apartment?
oh, I didn't know
I looked.
that.
Oh yeah, I
Wow.
looked it up.
Okay.
I had a problem. Anyways, go on.
Anyway, yeah. But so it's like you can predict. The more complicated the decision, the harder the prediction gets. So we're pretty good at predicting whether or not I'm going to click on a thing or watch this show, though there's some self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like I clicked on it because you put it in front of me. I would have clicked on something else, you know,
Yeah.
right? But the more complicated you get, are people going to buy houses next year? Are people going to vote Democrat in 4 years? It's sort of like predicting the weather. It's like we very quickly, the predictions fall apart as you go months and months forward,
Because of all the
particularly with things like
factors.
human decision making. Because who knows, like,
Yeah.
I never saw it coming that like low rise jeans would come back. What the fuck was that about? Right? I
Yeah,
remember
it's
some
a
of that.
eating
And I'm like, oh my God.
eating disorders with sippers.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so all of that is to say is that again, with the humility, it's like when we make predictions, and particularly when we use machine learning to predict things about humans,
Mhm.
we get worse and worse the more complex and complicated the thing is that we're trying to predict. And we also run the risk of biases being coded into the data, and thus we predict things with bias. So, for example, I worked with a lot of companies that said, we use predictive analytics to figure out how to sell, our soda to all these people, and it works pretty well. So now we're going to use predictive analytics to figure out what the performance score for all our employees should have been based on the data that we feed it. And so instead of having a human do it, why don't we just have a robot say, well, how many sales and how many meetings and how many this and da-da-da-da. And that doesn't work because for many reasons, but a big reason is that there's a lot less bias in data about did a soda sell or not. It either did or didn't. There might be errors, and we might be like have some complicated things about where the store was placing it, and it might not actually be about the brand, but it was about the weather that day or whatever. But like the data itself, it's like you either sold it or you didn't. Whereas at a company, if you've ever been through a performance review, like your prior data, whether I got a 5 or a 4 or a 3, is like a totally biased assessment based on whether my manager, like, I mean, there might be less biases in some cases, but generally speaking, it's pretty biased. And so you're predicting biases going forward. Like you're just saying, so perhaps I got a 3 instead of a 5 because my manager said I was bossy. Well, they probably said I was bossy because I present female, and loud people who look like me get called bossy as opposed to leaders. So I got a 3 instead of a 5. And then the CEO comes along and says, well, let's just let the robots do it. They're not biased. Here, robot, here's all the data this person has ever been given, had in the past about their scores. The robot is just going to learn to give me a 3 because I was given a 3 in the past. Does this make sense? I feel like I could have said this more concisely.
No. I mean, that's really fascinating. I actually did want to talk to you about the whole machine learning.
Yeah.
If you have time, because I know I could talk to you for 5,000 hours. I do have to say one thing. My unfinished journey has commented, I've heard that centrist Dems reach across the aisle, Repubs don't move. Result, today's center becomes tomorrow's left. Today's right becomes tomorrow's center. Is this accurate?
Today's center becomes tomorrow's left, today's right. So in the leadership, one of those first graphs that you showed early on in our conversation, in the House and in the Senate, it is the case, as I said, that ideologically we've moved apart. Whereas, Americans haven't quite so much. And the person who submitted the question is exactly right that the right, the apartness between this, so this is like the Democrats in the House and the Democrats in the Senate, and it's like, yay, we're drifting apart, or maybe not yay. The apartness has not been symmetric. If anything, the left has kind of drifted a little bit to the left and the right has drifted far more to the right. So if you measure the ideological scores of people in the House and you measure them, and it's not a perfect measure, but you can measure them by saying like, how did they vote on various, yay or nay and on all the roll call votes? Like, did they vote for or against a left-leaning or right-leaning policy? So all of that is to say is that the leaders have moved far to the right. So I don't know that I would say if anything, the opposite has taken place among leadership, which is to say that the right has moved further to the right. And I would say that, and this is more recent and I don't know for sure, but on the left, if anything, there's a division, right, between the left who says we should reach across the aisle and the left who says we should lean into the things that we believe. And so I think maybe the mean of those could look more to the left because we have a few on the left going further that way. But the mean left is not as far left as the mean right is to the right. I don't know if I answered the question, but it's, I guess it is true that Republicans aren't moving. And if anything, they're going the other way. That is true.
Yeah. And that is very frustrating. Thank you for your question, by the way.
Yeah, thank you.
And also my unfinished sock, who doesn't love an unfinished sock, says, don't be an uncritical thinker. Like and share the stream instead. Thank you very much. Yes, please do. Yeah. And that is really, I mean, and that's why what we were talking about earlier, it's really easy to just, call the right, the extreme right, especially.
Yeah.
White supremacist, racist.
Yeah.
And nobody likes to hear being called that, especially when it's true. But it's still, it's like, how do we, get the lasso? And because I sometimes think it's, as a biological anthropologist, especially with the patriarchy and also with the fact that, white people are becoming a minority in this country. It's like this last dying gasp of white supremacy. But unfortunately, it's like the longest gasp, ever that has ever happened. And how do you wrangle that demographic back? Is there a way? And I mean, there might not be an answer, but
I mean, and an open question too is, at least for me, is why? Why are the leaders, and again, this is leadership, but why are the leaders moving to the right, particularly? And we see this, I keep talking about gun control, but it's a really good example where it's like after these horrible tragedies and pretty much all the time, most Americans want some kind of sensible gun controls, and then you see that the House and the Senate just completely on the right just completely shuts it down. And so you can see that, a lot of these leaders are out of step with their own constituents. And you can compare, how they're voting versus the things that are going on, and how people. So then the question is, well, why? Why are we electing these people? And that I don't know. I don't know. Is it because the headlines and the algorithms, retweet Marjorie Taylor Greene because she says wild stuff that, generates buzz and gets people paying attention in a way that the person in the middle who's saying normal stuff doesn't get any attention. I was speaking with a member of Congress about this actually a couple months ago, and he was telling me about actually all these bipartisan bills that he's gotten put through, but they're not on issues that are like top line issues. It's about like what happens if, Congress is bombed, like who is in charge? And it turns out that's a really, no one knows.
Oh,
no one knows.
Wow.
Would you run a million elections all at once, or would you like have the next lower down with the governors? What? And there was no protocol. And so he worked on this big bipartisan bill to get, I'm getting the details wrong, but to get people on the left and the right to agree. And they totally agreed, and they found a thing. And now if someone bombs the Capitol, there's like some set of ideas about what would happen after that. And there wasn't before.
Right.
So it's like you can get to these things, but you don't hear about that. You hear about Marjorie Taylor Greene yelling something horrible and racist in, the State of the Union or whatever.
Right.
And so, or is it that the leaders are drifting to the right, and because I'm still left or right, I'm still the leader that's closest to me is going to be on the left or the right. And so if I'm a moderate Republican who's never going to vote for a Democrat, am I just going to vote for Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene and all these people because of my own identity and needing to vote for the right? Even if I actually sat down and looked at the policies, they would better map to the Democrat, but I won't because of them being labeled a Democrat. Like it seems to me that the reason that our leaders are out of step with us is an important thing to figure out. And I don't have a good answer for that.
Wow. No, but that's fascinating, that the fact that, because that's what it feels like. It feels like leaders, like you said, have become more extreme, but obviously they got there somehow.
Yeah.
How the hell, and why are they staying there? We experienced it recently here in Los Angeles and Beverly Hills. The DuPont, it's an all term abortion clinic that was going to open in Beverly Hills. We don't really have to go into this, but like nobody gets an abortion in the third trimester for shits and giggles. It's always because of something that is going to either kill the mother or the baby's already dead, whatever.
Yes.
We won't go into that. But point being, Beverly Hills is a very liberal city. I don't live there, but I do know that. And basically there was protests that were allowed to happen in Beverly Hills that got the clinic to, the city council basically, the management company pulled their lease. The city council didn't do anything to stop it, and it became this huge problem. And I went there twice to speak in front of the city council to kind of do a shame on you. Your constituents want this here, because this is, I think there's only 4 clinics in the whole US that do all the way up to the third trimester. Point being, it's just, how are these people getting elected? Why are they staying? It almost feels like when you mentioned that thing about people not wanting to, I will never vote for that person because I'll never vote. It just feels very, I'm not here to be mean, but it feels like a petulant child. Like I'll never do that, even though it makes sense, for your, like you said, voting for your own interest. And I think you also said something like this in a recent podcast where it was like, but who's to say what they think their own best interest is, right?
Yeah. No, that was Pat Egan again. I should just have him on the show all the time. He said something that, because I think about that a lot. And a question I get when I talk about this kind of stuff is, what do you say about people who vote against their own interest? And you gave the example of the price of eggs. It's like, I'm voting for prices to go down because inflation is too high. And then Trump gets in power and prices don't go down and inflation is still where it was. So like I voted, and I'm voting against my own interests in some way because I voted for someone who isn't helping me. And, or anyone who votes for a Republican in my mind is voting against their own interests because they're clearly trying to help the billionaire. This is my own partisan side of me coming out. Right. And so I was saying something like this. What do you say when people vote irrationally and against their own interests? And he said, well, who are you to say what someone's interest is? And maybe I'm a single issue voter and I am so pro-life that I voting in my interest means voting for the pro-life candidate, regardless of what else they stand for, or voting for the pro-Israel candidate, or voting for the the climate change care, whatever my sacred value or whatever my issue is,
Sure.
or whatever is, we're all maybe voting on the same issues. I'm voting on abortion and climate and this and that, but I'm weighting them totally differently. I maybe am only voting on abortion. And I had a friend tell me, you know, she was like, going into the last election, and she was like, I'm so like struggling because she's from Israel, very pro-Israel. And she was like, I'm pro-Israel, but I'm also pro-choice. And like, I don't know who to vote for. And it's like, I can't believe I have to choose between a country and my rights and like which one comes. Anyway, I realized I probably just generated a lot of hate mail for you for saying that, but it was like,
No, you're fine.
most people are voting. Most people
Yeah.
are pretty clear on their interests, I think, is a takeaway. Even if they like, I am saying you are materially worse off under Republicans, therefore your voting Republican is against your interest. But what I'm not taking into account is maybe their top priority is being pro-life. And so of course they're voting in their own interest. So it's like, it's very, who am I to say? That's kind of the
Yeah.
it was a humbling point for me, I think.
Well, I think, and it's interesting. I mean, just as an anthropologist, you know, like just the cultural relativism and just thinking that, you know, different, you know, we saw a big uptick in Latino men voting for Trump, you know, or Latinos in general, but mostly Latino men. But just, you know, why is that? And, you know, especially if that could mean deportation of those that are close to them or even themselves, because clearly we're not deporting people with due process, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah. Oh, Iris is in the background. Just, she's, excuse me, folks at home. We need a quick Iris break. Dear Lord, look at, if I die, I want to come back as Andrea Jones-Rooy's dog.
Oh, please remind her of that when she's whining at me for being on Zoom for too long. I'm amazed she slept through all this. It's amazing.
This is a rivet. She's an absolute little my little puggy wug. I don't know where she went. She's black, so they could be a little yin yang.
Oh, they would get along nicely.
They would get along. So yeah, Reason mostly ignores other dogs. So yeah, so she, you know, she plays hard to get.
Iris likes that. Yeah.
Oh, does she? Okay, she's into that. Perfect.
Yeah.
I know I got off on a tangent, but MLMs or machine learning.
Oh, LLMs.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. What is it? Machine learning.
So LLM are the large language models behind generative AI.
That's it. Yeah.
And confusingly, machine learning is often abbreviated as ML.
Yes.
So it's like ML, LLM. You're like MLM? Like, like
MMA? Is there fighting involved?
Yeah, MMA is mostly the data science that I do. Yeah.
And so, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's basically really messed up my data science teaching, because prior to LLMs and ChatGPT, one of the things that I study in data science is natural language processing. And so basically turning text into data. And so a lot of the work that I would do would say, okay, what are the things that are showing up in different news outlets? Can we turn those things into numbers and then predict what countries are going to do based on what they're talking about in the news? But the whole punchline of my class was like, it's actually really hard to turn text into data. And to do that, well, you have to really like strip out a lot of what makes language interesting and unique. And like, you know, Siri is pretty limited and Alexa isn't that great. And then halfway through that semester, they rolled out with ChatGPT publicly available. And I was like, just rip everything I just set up. Like, it's over. Like, it's
my God.
I mean, large language models I'm rarely impressed by anything, and I'm impressed by them. They're in a terrifying way. Like, I sometimes, when I first used ChatGPT, I was like awake for 3 days. I was like, the robot uprising is here, all of that. But at its core, it's a prediction engine. It's saying if the person has said all these words, what's the next word that's most likely to be said? And so it's kind of autocorrect on steroids. And that's not an original from me. I've heard other people talk about it that way, and that's how it's made the most sense to me. So it's, you know, one of the issues with AI when it comes to things that we've been talking about, polarization, misinformation, all of that, is that with LLMs, it's now a million times easier to churn out just impossible volumes of articles and posts and bots, and you can fill it was already a plethora of, you know, mommy blogs or whatever, and now every mom can write 200 blogs a day thanks to generative AI. So that is like, in the world of kind of the things that I'm thinking about, that's something that stresses me out. But I can say, well, this won't be helpful, but it was clarifying, is another person on my podcast, this guy named Josh Tucker, who studies misinformation and social media and politics, has pointed out that really with LLMs, and so ChatGPT and generative AI and misinformation, there's two problems that both of those things pose. So one is we see things that are false and we think they're true. And that's what you and I have been talking about. It's like I see something that says vaccines cause autism and I wrongly conclude that it must be true. So that's like a type 1 error, or um like a first order problem of fake news, right? And AI. And the second order problem is I see things that are true and I assume they're fake. Or I see things that are real, but I assume they're AI. And so
Ah,
that second order problem, he has said, is like trickier and potentially more concerning, because the actual quantity of fake news and misinformation that's out there in the world that any of us would encounter is actually relatively low. But because there's any, it's kind of like everything we see could be false because you don't know. And so when
mm,
I think about AI and generative AI and all of that, like that distinction was helpful to me to be stressed for two reasons. I was like, oh Christ, like it's not just that I'm seeing fake things and thinking that they're true, or like an AI photo and thinking it's real. It's that I also might be presented with a real photo and I might dismiss it because I think it's AI.
fake.
And so
Yeah.
that's like, that to me seems like the harder problem to solve. I'm just a mountain of depression today. I'm
Dear,
very
no, but
sorry.
this is fascinating. It's
It's
no, it's so
interesting though, right?
well, yeah, because I've had, on the one side, I've had so many people share fake images and fake
Yeah.
videos even, and I'm
Yeah.
like, people that I'm like, "You should know better."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because
It's
one,
hard
it
to
looks
know. It's increasingly
some
hard to know.
it is
Yeah.
increasingly hard to know, but sometimes it's, like, so extreme, like, that's not gonna happen, or even put it through a reverse Google search,
Mhm.
image search, because I feel
Mhm.
like that is also a way to kinda combat that. But, yeah, I mean, it is scary, and like you said, then it's kinda like the boy that cried wolf, right?
Yeah.
With AI, where now you don't know what to trust. Even, like, somebody does share a picture that is a terrible thing that happened, and people are like, "Oh, that didn't happen." It's like,
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
wow,
I
that's
mean,
fascinating.
and it's so tricky because, and I deal with this I try to be mindful of it and I don't do it well, is like, it goes back to what you've said about confirmation bias and motivated reasoning, where it's like, science means applying critical thinking and doing all these things and saying, how could I be wrong? I know that I am more likely to apply all this nice critical thinking to articles and images and news clips that I disagree with. Then I roll in with all my critical thinking and I say, well, this is an error and that's an error and blah, blah, blah. And then I read a study that says actually vaccines are super safe. And I say, great, I don't need to read anything else. Like I'm not saying that I'm wrong in my allocation of time, but I am being hypocritical in that I am not applying critical thinking to the same level when it's something that I agree with versus when I don't. And so that's where the issue with AI, I think, comes into play, where it's like, I'll study a photo and be like, that could be AI. And I'm only going to study it if it's a photo it goes against my worldview in some way. If someone shows
Right?
a photo of Barack Obama being awesome, I'm not going to be like, but is it AI? I'm like, yeah, because he's fucking on, right? Whereas if
Yeah.
it's Trump doing something or, that seems like I might be approving of, I'm like, well, that's obviously fake, right? Or so we're like,
Caring, just caring.
yeah, yeah. So
Feeding the poor, that's not real. That's yeah.
I mean, it's like I'm being and here's like a non-political example. Like this is how deep it goes. So I recently had an annual physical, thank you so much, and my
Congratulations.
blood sugar level came back, the A1C came back at 5.7, which is called pre-diabetes, and I freaked out. And because I was like, I don't need any sugar, I'm gonna die.
You're
And
so healthy.
thank you.
Yeah.
But I like spiraled. This was like in January. And then like 2 weeks ago, I went to a different doctor for something else, just like a different checkup. And I was like, by the way, is there any chance we could check my A1C levels? Because I've been like very stressed. And I was like, I think maybe that test wasn't right. And blah, 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 blah. And like, And so she's like, okay. And it came back as 5.2. And I agree with those results because I like those results. And so now I'm like, that test was perfect. I don't need any more information. Like literally, I just did this to myself about my own health. And like, this is not a political thing. This is not everything. I was like, that test was wrong. This test was right. I'm living my life the right way. Like, that's how deep it goes. Like, that's some subtle shit, you know?
Yeah. No, that is intense. It's like I grew up, in the Los Angeles in the '90s, so, and we talked about skinny low-rise
Yeah.
jeans and eating disorders. Yeah, it's like a scale. Scale I
Yeah.
didn't like the weight. Give me
Yeah.
5 other scales
Yeah.
until
Exactly.
until it told me what it wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's bonkers. It is, and that's something that I think is really interesting, and I think I almost would said just scientists, but good scientists are self-aware of this. We're
Right.
self-aware of our own biases. And this was actually one of the questions that I had, before we went on this wonderful journey. I've loved this conversation so much. But just, are there any sort of tips, tricks that you use or that you advise others to use to try to extract their own
Mm.
biases from their research? I mean, I know that probably, again, as a scientist, I'm thinking there's a lot of different factors at play, right? And ways that one can do that. But I was just wondering if maybe you had a way to do it
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah, it's a great question, and if I knew the answer, I think I or whoever had the answer would win a Nobel Prize, because it's, seeing your own bias is basically the most impossible thing there is. I mean, even today when I was looking for because my article and the Beast is behind a paywall, I was like trying to like get to it because I can't even get to it because I don't have a subscription. I was trying
And
to
I'm
get to
cheap.
it. Yeah, so I was trying to get to it through other like Wayback Machine, or like, I'm so unethical. I'm like, support independent journalism, and also I'm gonna sting. Anyway, I ended up getting to it through a page that analyzed bias in media sources, and it flagged my article as left biased, and I was like, no. I was like, that's wrong. I was like, their algorithm is wrong. They don't know what they're doing. And I was like, I mean, the Daily Beast is a left-leaning publication, no doubt about it. I am a left-leaning person, no doubt about it. The article was objective, true. Like, what the fuck? Like, why would you call that article? So I was like, obviously these things can't be trusted. And then I was like, oh my God, I'm doing it to myself. Like, I probably do have a left-leaning bias in that article, because you can't see, like, it's just your worldview, right? Anyway, all of that is to say is that tips for doing that, one comes from the great Adam Grant in his book, Think Again, I think it's called, or is it Rethinking? Think Again,
Mhm.
where he says the number one bias that we can all look out for right now is the I'm not biased bias. The minute you find yourself thinking, yeah, but I'm not biased, it's over for you. We're all biased. We have it built in. It's like, and I give a lot of trainings at companies around bias and like behavioral economics, and we have biases around like risk aversion. Like, we're much more likely to put a bunch of money on or vote or gamble in different ways if we stand to lose money or gain money. We tend to be more hurt by one negative comment than we are improved by one positive comment, right? Like, it's that asymmetry is a bias, and it's built into humans. And so if you think I'm not biased, well, you are, because those sorts of things are true for pretty much all of us, except for very few. So for the rest of the biases, one, assume you're biased. Two, talk to people you don't agree with. Not necessarily, oh, this means I have to go talk to a Trump supporter, but it does mean if I'm presenting my research on, text analysis of headlines in China, I should make sure to talk to people who are skeptical of our ability to conclude anything from text analysis. They don't have to be my primary audience, but I could take into account try to talk to all the different potential types of skeptics that could be out there, and be open to being wrong. And this is something that also goes back to what we were talking about before, is like something I say to companies a lot is like, disagreement is a resource. So if I'm talking to someone,
Mm.
or I'm in a room talking to people about, I read that somewhere and I was like, that's good. And we have different views. Like, I think we should do, and again, set aside politics, set aside identity, set aside the isms and those sorts of biases. But we're just like in a room, we're like, I think this is what we should do to like promote our podcast going forward. And you're like, I actually think we should do this. I actually think we should do that. It's not bad that we disagree. It's good, because it means we're gonna talk about all the different ways we could grow our podcast. But when we talk about things that are like, actually, I think what you said was racist, or the way that came across felt very transphobic, again, we freak out. And a lot of it is understandable, and it's our identity, and it's hurtful, and I'm trying not to be racist and not to be transphobic. But can I come to the world with that kind of humility that says, I know that I'm biased, I'm doing my best, and I'm going to welcome information about my biases so that I can hopefully learn to navigate the world a little bit more objectively than I currently do. All of that said, that doesn't mean you have to take every piece of feedback you ever hear. So it's imperfect, but I think, and I say this to myself as well, it's like being open, welcoming a different view as information rather than a threat is a good way to
Yes.
reduce biases. Think about like dudes in the workplace who are like, oh, like, she got a job because she's a woman and they need more women in leadership. It's like, I could just say, yeah, you're fucking sexist. Or I could say, well, maybe it's possible that she got her job for other reasons. And let's think about what those reasons could be without accusing him of being sexist, and then maybe he can update his views, blah, 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 blah. I think I might just be weak-willed. I think that might be the headline here. Like,
I
I'm
don't
just
think
a
you're
coward.
no. I don't. Well, see, this is the thing. What we were talking about, like the two ways of really engaging. I mean, there's probably more than two ways, but whether it's
Yeah.
screaming at somebody like, this is how I feel, or being like, well, maybe this, or sometimes asking you more questions. After the
Yeah.
election, there was a man who was followed me on Instagram. I met him at randomly, I do burlesque now, and I met him at a
I hear
show,
that's
and
so good, what I've seen too.
thank you. Well,
Congrats.
so
Yeah.
I learned it from watching you.
Oh,
I actually
definitely
do
not true.
burlesque with someone who knows you.
Oh, who?
So yeah, Lauren Fireman.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Yes, yeah. I know.
yeah.
We sing
Oh,
your
say hi to her
praises
for
all the
me.
time. If in fact, if she's
Lovely.
watching, hello. She goes by Lo-Fi, and I absolutely adore her. I saw her at a
Lo-fi.
wedding this weekend.
Hi.
But no, but I met this gentleman, and it wasn't romantic or flirting or anything, but he just followed me on Instagram, and he slipped into my DMs right after the election that said, I voted for Trump because of the economy.
Mm.
And I got into it, and I didn't try to. I just said, well, that's not how the economy works. Usually, what you're seeing is a reflection of probably the past administration. Especially if it's only one 4-year cycle in. And but then he immediately called, I think, Kamala. He said some hateful things to Kamala.
Yeah.
And I was like, there, and all I said
There it
was,
is.
there it is. There it is.
Yeah.
That's why. And he also was, an immigrant who came to the US illegally and told me and said, I think people should come here legally. And I said, even if it means that you could possibly, or your family, be deported. But he said a lot of hateful things.
Mhm.
I think he called me names. And people were like, why aren't you blocking him yet? And I said, because these are data points. These
Mm.
are, I'm learning. And I didn't really yell at him at any point. Because he also went after vaccines.
Mm.
And, I gave him some, I talked about facts and stats, and which I know don't always change hearts and minds, but these are data points. Even trolls that comment things, I try to engage with them
Good for
to
you. Yeah.
not, it's one of those things where it's like at a certain point, it's a lost cause and it's only going to give me heartburn and a
Right.
headache, and it's not worth it. But at the same time, sometimes I've had people apologize to me on social
Wow.
media. I'm not even
Wow.
kidding.
Wow.
And it's rare. It's
Okay.
rare, but even still, it's like, again, like you said, it's a resource. It's telling me how my dad's incredibly, he is almost left of Lenin. He's very, 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 very like social, like Bernie guy,
Mhm.
very liberal, but he watches Fox News because it's, kind of like
for
keep
him.
your friends close,
It's true.
keep your
I think
enemies closer.
I can't do
Like,
it, but I respect that actually. Yeah. I used
I
to try to
can't.
listen to like Limbaugh back in the day, and I started having a heart attack.
Oh,
I actually called in once because
oh,
they were talking about how Obama was doing abortions in the White House, and so I was like, "Hi, first time listener, first time caller. You're so full of shit." Like, yeah.
where can we find? I want so
God.
badly to get. I want to go get a DeLorean, some plutonium, go back in time and find that. That's amazing.
Yeah. It
Ha-
was it didn't work. It didn't work. Like it's still we're in the
You
world that we're
tried.
in. Yeah, but I mean, it's also I also try to remind myself of this is like there's probably no one right strategy. And
Yeah.
saying that, like, I think I could probably talk to white moderate Trump voters in a way that could potentially move them hopefully leftward, but also I need to just actually begin from the research on political persuasion basically comes down to like you can't go in with a sales pitch. You have to go in and like try to understand where they're coming from. So it's not like I can just like explain really, really, really well. It's like, let me understand why what you're describing is so important to you, blah, blah, blah. So it's really hard. But I think there's room for that and anger and protests and fighting for rights and all that. And so I try to remind myself that as well, where it's like, am I just being like a weak-willed, like white woman being like, but what if we all just tried not to be so mad? And it's like, we are mad and there's horrible things that are happening and we should be mad. And, maybe we wouldn't have had a Holocaust if more people had been mad. And I could be totally wrong. I just have this like other hypothesis that maybe both is the strategy.
There could be multiple. I mean, it's like multiple
Or maybe
things
something
at
else,
play.
but as you said, but I can only think of those two.
No,
There's
I
a
mean,
third one, which is watching White Lotus and never going outside again, which I'm also
there
guilty of.
there is that. No, but I think you again, like back to the radical empathy to an extent,
Mhm.
right?
That's right.
So I
Yeah.
think, I don't think you're weak-willed at all, not even a little bit. But like I think it's knowing and like the whole thing, like it takes all types. It's going to take
Hmm.
all types of ways, I think, to get this moving
Yeah.
and shaken. So,
I
I
mean, I
think,
think, and this is more of just like my personal project, I think, is like, as opposed to like a declaration of what we should all be doing, because I have no idea and I'm terrified and horrified by the news every single day.
yep.
And while also recognizing that I have a ton of privilege and am mostly unaffected on a day-to-day basis currently by it all, and so that's its own complicated mess. Anyway, all of that is to say is that after the election in November, I remember just thinking, I was just like, it was so evident to me why voting for the Harris Walz ticket was the only obviously good choice. It's like, it's just so insane that Trump even had a fighting chance in the polls. And I saw what I wanted to out of the polls as well. Every single poll said it was going to be a close race, except for the one. And I focused on the one. Like, I did all the things you're not supposed to do because you got your own like hopes and dreams and values all tied and identity all tied up into it. And then I remember after the election being like, I obviously have no understanding of what a lot of people in this country are thinking, because these people voted in a way that I find completely unthinkable. Like, it wasn't even like, oh, I could see where they were coming from. It was like, I just don't understand. And so for my own personal project, I have been trying to understand what could lead someone to vote that way when it could just not have been more. Like, I get nervous basically anytime I find myself in a position where I can't even fathom where the other side is coming from.
Yeah,
Does that make sense? Like, that makes me
it
nervous, like, as
does.
a scientist. And it's like, I don't have to agree
Yeah.
with you. I can think you are hateful and full of shit, but I would love to know, for example, you talking to that person in the comments, like, or in the DMs, like, how is it possible that someone who came to this country illegally thinks other people should come? Like, how? I would like to know that. And I think that we need to
Yeah.
understand that in order to say messages that appeal to those people. Like, it was just everything that happened at like the DNC, like every message I was like shouting. I was like, yes, yeah, we could have said more about Palestine. Like, there's a lot that could have been done differently, but like I agreed with, and I was like, it's so obvious, but it didn't persuade people. So it's like we can either say it louder or we can say it better. And I'm trying to figure out how to say it better. And I don't have the answer.
No, and it reminds so in conservation, I did primate conservation, and there's a lot of times where people come in and just tell the people on the ground
Mm,
what they need. They don't
yeah.
ask
Right.
them.
Right.
They don't. So I worked with spider monkeys in Panama, and there's a lot of deforestation in the area because people need to make money, and so they're cutting down the forest to raise cattle. It's less so of a problem because a lot of the children of these cattle ranchers don't want to do that. They're moving into
Mm,
different industries,
mm,
and the people are fantastic, lovely, wonderful humans, and very much love their land in Panama. They love it
mm.
there, and so when you go in and you ask questions like, "What do you guys need?" Like, "We need to make money," and it's like, okay, well, let's figure out a solution where you know again, reframing it,
Yeah.
like not calling it conservation of spider monkeys, but how can you make more money? How
Right.
can this be beneficial for you? Like, reframing climate change, even changing climate change from global warming to climate change wasn't enough, right? Now we have to
Yeah.
kind of just be like, how can we create jobs? Wink, wink, climate
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think, listening and finding solutions that will immediately help them,
I mean, I'm
because I,
thinking it's such a good example. The one that you just described, because that's exactly what we've done as like Americans, like the Peace Corps and the whatever, which has done a lot of amazing work, but also has done a lot of work where you roll in and you're like, all right, everyone, we're making jewelry now, and you're like, what? Like, okay, yeah. So it's like, is the Democratic Party just doing that to the Republic? Come on, like, this is what's happening. You're like, you're not seeing me where I am at all, or what I'm thinking about, or what I care about. But all of it, what you're describing, and I'm so out of my depth here, but what you're describing is making me think of like having a conversation with a good friend who needs to break up with their boyfriend. I'm sorry for my like
no, I love
2001 like
it.
clueless plot line here to late 90s millennial story
We've
here.
all been there.
But it's like you're talking to your friend, they have a shit boyfriend, he's abusive, he's horrible, he's da 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 da. Obviously not physically, or else you call the police, but like bad, right? It's a bad situation. You need them to break up, and you can yell and yell. I think you need to break up with them. You got to break up with them. What do you do? You got to break. Finally, you have to be like, why are you with him? What is he giving you? And
Yeah.
like, I'm not saying that that's going to get you there either, and this is why I'm out of my depth. But it's like, I feel like there's a logic in there where it's like at some point you just be like, why do you keep going back for this? And until I understand that, no amount of pointing out how horrible the boyfriend is ever going to change anything. I say this having never
1000%.
helped a friend out of a bad relationship in my life. But that
No.
feels right?
It does. Well, if you like, I know that this one always helped. Make a list of why you're with them, and then it's, you know what I mean. But it really
Yeah.
does when you stop telling somebody what to do and start asking, what do you
Yeah.
want to do?
Yeah.
That is when, and what do you, and not even what to do, what do you need? It's
Yeah.
literally walking in going, what do you need?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and what do you need from a partner? Is he giving you any of these things?
Right. Right. I
And
mean,
then
and
just
to-
walk
yeah.
away.
Yeah.
And Homer
Just
sits
open up
in
the
the
door.
bushes. Yeah, exactly. And then be like,
I mean, and that goes back to my conversation with my token conservative friend who loves when I call him that, where he was like, look, he was like, I voted for Trump. He was like, I was truly undecided. I didn't know on the day of the election um, uh, who I was going to vote for. And
what?
yeah, I was like, that's insane. And he said, I swore that after January 6th, I would never vote for Trump because I thought that was unfair. He's on the right, but he's not MAGA. So he's like,
Got it.
and he said that basically it's sort of what I paraphrased earlier. He was like, look, I ultimately voted for Trump, even though I hate him and I hate everything he stands for, because I'm so worried about government overreach by the Democrats. And in particular, he was worried, and this was stunning to me, he was worried about the fact that during COVID, Tim Walz, as governor of Minnesota, enacted policies that made him very uncomfortable, where it was like neighbors could spy on other neighbors for not wearing a mask or not social distancing. And like, that was why he voted for Trump. And regardless of what you want to say about that logic, two things I take away from that are, one, like, I think he was working with, like, I think it was probably true that Tim Walz did those things. So I can't even go after him for misinformation. I'm like, well, okay, it's in the context. It's like not my headline about how COVID went down, but I didn't even know about that. But like, supposing that's true, it's a weird thing to fixate on, but like confirmation bias, we find the data that we think is relevant. But two, no amount of Harris and Walz talking about like economic growth would have ever changed his mind. So we're over here arguing about like, what's the right language for like bringing hope to America and lifting up young people and amplifying voices and supporting it. No amount of language would have done anything unless they specifically said, and by the way, we're not going to set up a hotline to call on your neighbors. Like, that's a long way of saying that like nothing the Democrats could have done would have helped had they not talked to people like him. Does that make sense? I mean,
God,
maybe
yeah.
they were, and he's just a weird example, but I was just so blown away. I was like, that's what you voted on? I've
That
never
was
even
the
heard
little-
of that. And I feel
That is
I'm pretty
wild.
informed.
And now we have RFK wanting to register people without, you know what I mean? It's like, talk about government oversight. Talk
Well,
about,
I mean, that's the other thing is I'm overdue to talk to him and I can't bring myself to do it. So I talk a
Oh.
big game about talking to the other side, but I'm like, if you say that you think any of this is okay, I'm going to lose it.
no. And,
Like,
and
I
but
have to
I also,
get into a place where I can confront that. Yeah.
you do have to get emotionally prepared, but I think that you losing it would be completely warranted, quite
Thank you.
honestly.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm here to support you. I got your
Thank you.
back.
Thank you. Yeah. I'll,
Oh
if
my-
you see me in front of a burned pile of rubble, I like burned down my apartment out of fury from just hearing from this dude.
You and Iris just sitting there.
Yeah. Just like, what else can
Staring
we
up.
burn? Yeah.
Oh my God. No, but I do think this has been a journey.
It has been a journey. I didn't
It
expect, I was
has
like,
been
we're
a-
going to talk about
No,
data,
this is-
whatever. Yeah.
I know, but this was it's so funny because I was excited to talk to you because we haven't talked in far too long
Oh,
anyway.
this was lovely.
But
Yeah.
I think you're so brilliant, and you know I'm gonna no, you really are. You know so much, and you know you like you know I know my blind spots, and it's like I'm very aware, and you're also so incredibly self-aware of yourself and your decisions, and even like your bias, but you're just so well read about all of this, and you know so much that I love it because I feel like I can ask you questions, and you're like I got this.
Oh, well, we've been very fortunate to talk specifically about things that I spend a lot of time paying attention to. Like if this were a conversation about spider monkeys, I would have had zero to say.
I could have carried us. It's okay.
Yeah,
No,
okay.
but
Next
you
time,
still,
yeah.
I would bring you data on spider monkeys, and I feel
There
like
we
you
go.
could just like come up with a wonderful analysis models using your Pythons.
Let's do it. Let's
Do
do it.
I wonder? I have data science on Pythons.
Yeah.
Using Python, I think would just be so beautiful.
Let's do that.
That
You
just,
can write the
that's-
code in such a way that it like moves down the page like a Python.
I love that. I
No.
know.
Python, the language, was named after Monty Python. Isn't that lovely?
That makes me so happy.
Yeah.
No way.
It was supposed
And
to be a joy to use. And so I don't know what
Is it
Monty
a-
Python thinks about it, but
I was
it
gonna
is what it was
say.
named after. Yeah.
Do you use what do you use
I do use
R or
Python.
Python?
I use Python. I started with R, but I was teaching in Python, so I switched. Do you do coding? You seem to.
I would love to. No, I've
Right.
never done coding. I would love to.
It's very fun.
to
It's
learn.
a lot more fun than I thought it would be.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All my
Which
data
took
are
some time.
maps. I was GIS lab. That was where I lived
Cool.
when I
Yeah,
was in
I don't know
grad
anything
school.
about GIS other than it's important and cool. But
I don't know much anymore. It's been
yeah.
it's been 15 years, but seriously, I would love to learn how to code. And one of the things I did want to mention, only because we didn't even get into the circus or the comedy, but like you are I think just such an ultimate multi hyphenate, being a data scientist, a circus performer, a comedian. I mean, I don't know. In the Venn diagram of these things, is there one thing in the middle?
Creativity and rigor. Two things. I think that's at the center. That sounds like a very like self applauding answer, but it's only because I have tried to make sense of it before. But it's like all of those things, science, comedy, circus, require a ton of creativity. And they also require a bunch of like what my game theory professor in grad school used to say, a commitment to precision.
Yes. You don't want to fall while doing an aerial
Exactly.
routine.
Exactly. And like comedy, it's like you obviously it's an art and it's creative, but like if someone coughs halfway through the delivery, it's over for you, right? Not always, but and then in science, So that's what I would put at the center of those things. But self-loathing, I would also put at the center of those things. Yeah.
Yes, I do agree with that. I feel
Yeah.
like that sometimes I always joke that I don't know, field work and comedy are kind of like childbirth. I say this as somebody who doesn't have children. I love that. But
Yeah.
they always say that like during childbirth, you're like, I hate this. Why did I do this? But as soon as
Yeah.
you have the baby in your arms, you're like, when can we do this again?
Oof. Yeah.
And it's, I mean, again,
Yeah.
I say
No,
this
that
as a
is
childless.
having also never had a child, I will remind myself of that the next time I'm like, "Ugh, why would anyone?" I'm like, "Oh, it's like doing a really good stand-up show." Like, okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. And like, I can't wait to do this
Yeah.
again. Same with
Yeah.
like field work. Oh my God, chasing monkeys all day. It's like,
Yeah.
what am I doing? And then that was great. I was
Yeah.
the happiest time of my life. Why
Yeah,
was
yeah,
I
yeah.
bemoaning it? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, yeah,
Oh
yeah.
my
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah.
Well, and what is the filthiest thing you've done in the name of science?
Ooh. Hmm. I've slept in a
Go
lot
on.
of like under my desk a lot. I don't know if that counts as filthy. Like I don't chase monkeys. I look at spreadsheet, right? So, but I have slept like under my desk and like on airport floors and like because I was like both broke and it's like, oh, I'm gonna take a 3 a.m. bus, and so I could just like sleep on this bench and then I'll do my research when I get there, kind of thing. I don't know if that counts. I also, I guess, during my prelim exams for my PhD, we had a 24-hour exam, and the idea was you would go to bed at some point in that, and I stayed up all night. I was like, I'm gonna write for 24 hours, and I was just eating sugar out of a bowl by the end to stay awake. These are so tame compared to what you've done, I'm sure. But
We
it
won't
was
go
gross.
into it.
Just
That's
it was,
gross.
it was brown sugar at least. I'm not an animal, but
Uh,
yeah.
that's some dignity there.
Yeah. Yeah.
There you
It
go.
had some
No, no, no,
texture
no,
to it.
no.
Yeah.
That's a good, yeah, a little
But like
extra.
the coffee, I was like, you get to a point where caffeine won't do anything for you anymore. And I
Oh,
was
yeah,
like, you gotta
yes.
step up
Step that
somehow.
shit up.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No wonder the diabetes, the
Yeah, exactly.
pre-diabetic
It's
thing.
like,
I'm
oh,
sorry,
what?
Andrea,
Don't eat sugar. It's
but
like, I don't eat sugar except for out of a bowl with a spoon. Like
for 24 hours.
no, yeah.
No, these are good. And how do people remain hopeful?
Mm. Ooh. Hmm. Mm. I think trust that what you do matters, because the minute you do what's right, if you think it's protesting, if you think it's arguing, if you think it's understanding, if you think it's whatever, like trust that it makes a difference no matter how small it is, because I think if you lose that, none of us do anything. And I say that 1,000% to me because I'm sitting here being like, I'm just writing a like what do I need to go out and build a statue? I don't know what I need to do. Like I need to like fight the government. But I'm like, nothing I do matters. But I think if we all think that, then none of us do anything. So like what you're doing obviously matters a ton. And what anyone is doing to help get, critical thinking and science out, but also like getting some levity out. Or if what you're doing is like, helping people, like being nice to customer service, like that helps too, right? It's like every little thing helps. I'm being full of shit. But
No, you're not.
I think, right? You have to
Great.
believe that it makes a
Yeah.
difference. Otherwise we won't, it's over.
If
Otherwise
we're
you
all
just read the news and you go to bed and your life sucks. And the world ends.
Absolutely. If we're
Yeah.
all miserable sad sacks, then you're stuck in it.
Yeah.
Big miserable sad sacks. So you got to make the
Yeah.
most of it. And I think that's great. I mean, I think the goal right now is to paralyze and overwhelm,
Exactly. And
and
I
that
fall into it all
cruelty
the
is the
time.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that you're right. I mean, I finding those things that you can do, even if it's
Yeah.
just one little thing,
Yeah.
being nice. So no, and you are doing a lot, despite what
Oh,
you think.
that's nice of you to
Despite what you
say.
think, it's
Yeah.
true.
All right.
And you have an amazing podcast. Please, please, everyone, listen to Behind the Data. It is fantastic, and I can't wait for you to churn out more.
They'll be churning. We have some stuff about bias in AI coming out this week, keeping it cheerful. And
Ooh,
I got to have you come on and talk about monkey data or some
yes,
other
I
kinds
would
of
love that.
data. So, and if
Whatever,
anyone
yeah.
listening is a fan of a particular data set, basically it's like we come on and talk about a type of data or a data set that's super cool that we're not hearing about enough. And I don't know anything about monkey data. So let's go.
Oh, let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's go. I'm all about it.
Yeah.
And where can folks find you?
You can find me at Jones-Rooy, JonesRooy on Instagram and YouTube mostly. I technically have a TikTok. There's nothing on it at the moment, but there will be. I used to, and then I stopped, and then
Oh, it was
but
great.
Jones-Rooy, yeah,
Yeah.
Jones-Rooy, and
Yeah.
jonesroy.com.
And you're
Oh, and
hilarious.
behindthedatashow.com. There you go. That's that.
Oh, yes. And the link should be in the chat. I know that Peter DeTucker, my amazing producer, has been
Thanks, Peter.
adding that to the yes. Oh my goodness, Andrea, this was such an amazing
This was
conversation.
epic. Thank you for having
This
me.
was so good.
I was in like such a bad way all day and all week. So this conversation,
Oh.
like your amazing show and all the work that you're doing has always kept me going. And then to get to actually interact with you and be part of it was a dream. So let's hang out sometime.
Let's
in
do it.
person.
Let's come
Yeah,
come back to New York. Come to LA.
I would love to. I need
You
to.
should.
Yeah.
You need to come. Bring
Yeah.
Iris.
I
She's so
will. Oh God,
she's
she's so
passed out.
tired. Why is she so sleepy?
Ah,
Okay. Yeah.
she's so sleepy. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much, Andrea, for being here. And
Thank
I
you.
cannot wait to have you back to talk more
I'm
about what's
available.
going on. Please.
Excellent.
I will find
All
you.
right. All right. Please
Uh,
do.
Thank you. And thanks to my producer, Doctor. I always call him Doctor. Peter, you're now a doctor. Dr. Peter DeTucker in the Netherlands. I'm getting it's been one of those long shows, so I get kind of like punch drunk, which is real fun. And this is a reminder that if you like the show, you can like it, you can subscribe, you can comment, you can share. I would love that. And if you want to support this illustrious production of Survival of the Filthiest, please consider joining my Patreon. I'm going to be cranking out, more shows. I'm actually taking my live stage show to Glastonbury's festival, the Glastonbury Festival in the UK, to the
Yay.
Science Future stage. Yes, so you can help be a part
Congrats.
of that. Thank you. I'm so excited. It's going to be wild and wacky. And next week, I'm going to have Dr. Augustine Fuentes, a biological anthropologist who actually has a new book called Sex is a Spectrum, the biological limits of the binary, which is very important right now. And that's going to be on the 29th at, hold it, 12 p.m. Pacific time. So please
I'll be
tune
there.
in next Tuesday. Yes, yeah, it's gonna be really Augustine's fantastic. And so until next time, folks. Oh yeah, I have to do my patrons. This is like, okay, I'm gonna thank all my wonderful patrons for making this happen. This is Daniel Wynn, Claude Allen, Tom Skullbeard, Tori Yates Orr, Redding Maley, Dana Logan, Michael Z. Weinstock, David Leitner, James Hudspeth, Anthony Zana, Tom Berman. That was actually the wedding where I saw Data. Jen Beverstock, Scott Froschauer, JSB, Jeff Cohen, Andrea Bloom, Jonathan Marks, and Kelly Frazier. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. And until next week, please stay filthy, stay healthy, and keep fighting the good fight.